Hello, Heiner. Barry. Keith.
Hi. Hi.
Hey. Hey, I'm just checking. I got a different camera. I was wondering if it's coming across okay.
Looks great. Fabulous.
Does it look better than the camera I used to use?
It's zooming in more on you and less on the room around you.
Yeah, that's a setting that's actually controllable.
Yes. The new cameras tend to have electronic zoom options.
So I should keep this because on another machine, it didn't work as well. So I tried it on this machine.
Is this your NUC?
Actually, no, this is my e-gain provision, very old Dell laptop.
Oh, well, works great.
My old camera on my NUCs. I have two NUCs.
Yeah, I mean, we don't see the dogs or anything, which is a nice background, but so what? Well, maybe not so what. I like looking at the dogs.
This is actually my downstairs office, so it's very bare right now.
Yeah, I get that.
So are you stable now in your location?
Thanks for asking, Heiner. Yes, unbelievably, my purchase of this home actually did close, and it closed officially on July 30th or August 2nd, something like that. So it's been about a month already. And I've already sent in my first mortgage payment. So if I keep making my payments, I will be stable. So thank you for checking. Thank you. And Barry, thank you for offering assistance as well. You were very generous.
No problem.
Let's see. There's Glenn.
Yeah, Glenn is gonna lead the discussion today, is that right?
Yes. And he's
Okay.
quite enthusiastic. So we shall.
There he is.
Hello, hello.
Glenn,
Hey, good to see you guys.
good afternoon.
Yeah. So I'm not sure who's gonna come today, but we'll see. I think Colin was gonna come. Saw him writing a little bit in the chat.
Did you advertise it anywhere else besides within GCC's web Facebook page?
No, I just wrote that Facebook post. I'll just, see if
Okay.
how many saw it. So we should just wait a few minutes.
Yeah, you guys are all very, very prompt. It's only a minute and a half past the time.
Yeah. So have you guys had a chance to read through the notes from or had a chance to listen to the whole thing?
I have to confess, not completely. I scanned them quickly.
Yeah, I didn't have time to look at the entirety of it either. And the Google Docs didn't really have much in it, did it?
It had the transcript, and that was
Oh, okay.
it had a bunch of Glenn's notes. Glenn actually put a lot of notes in there.
Oh, let me go take a double look at that then.
Hello, Stacey. Yeah, they were pretty much the same notes, more or less, that it was in the Facebook post. So, maybe it can be good to just read a few excerpts. I can do that today, just for a little to
I see the transcript.
refresh.
The Google Docs doesn't actually have the same notes that Glenn put in Facebook. Just has a transcript. Unless I'm missing something here.
Really?
No, I think up above there should be a whole bunch more, isn't there? Yeah.
There's the YouTube, nothing in reference, where announced Zulip in Facebook, and then just notable ideas, just leaving everything at the door attachment. Well, maybe, I'm on the wrong one. That's why. I'm looking at the wrong one. I'm looking at the one-on-one docs. Never mind.
Yeah, there's quite a few of those docs in there.
Yeah, sorry.
So,
There's several hundred in
Are
there.
you, well, wait a minute. Are you looking for the one where it might be under where I posted the YouTube video, the Stages in Development series?
That's a different one, I think.
that's I guess that would be another one.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a different.
Yeah.
This is the Dark Horse
Yeah.
podcast, right?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Different from the one about stage theory with Nora.
Yeah, I came in late. I thought you were talking about
Yeah,
that
I-
whole 1,000 comment.
And I had confused it with yet another one that was up this week, which is the one-on-one with Doug and Sam. That's the one I had up on my screen, but I realized it's the wrong one.
Did they have another one-on-one after
No, it's the
the
same
first
one.
one? Okay.
It's just
Yeah.
that that's the one that I had brought up on my second monitor, and I realized as I was reading it, it wasn't the correct one.
I'm just gonna paste it into the chat.
Oh,
We'll see if the chat can take it.
Well, for posterity, I would suggest you also put it in that Google Doc.
I thought it was in there. Didn't you put it in there?
I didn't put it in there myself, no.
I'm pretty sure.
Your notes in Zulip a long time ago, but I didn't do it recently.
Okay. So, wait a minute. Is there a limit to what you
Yes.
can put in the chat? Oh,
Yeah, but
it's so idiotic, those limits.
it's about 500 characters or something like that. Ballpark.
You know, that's like one thing that would make life so much easier if they just remove those limits. It would just save us so much more time to spend on productive things instead of having to
Chop it up.
move forward and back and chop and do all kinds of stuff.
Yeah.
You can basically do one semi-long paragraph at a time.
Yeah, it's just so it's unbelievable that computer technology has not evolved further.
The technology is there.
I mean,
Some implementers, some engineers, some product marketing people make, well, let's say, constrained decisions. Trade-off.
yeah, it's decisions that don't take any account to the actual interests of the user. It's like
They only address the core market they're going after. They don't consider us their core market.
You know,
it's like
that's why it's hard to use it for academic discussions, because academic discussions tend to be at least a full page just for the abstract.
Yeah.
it's like you just can't do real work with text with those kind of limits.
No.
It's just you just can't do it because it's too much work. And so like where am I even now? Like I have to committed. Yeah, that's like just at the beginning.
Yeah, you got 4 bullet
Seriously?
paragraphs.
That's like nothing.
Yeah, 4 bullet paragraphs, and then you had to break it off.
Yeah, no, this is just totally ridiculous. You know, that Zoom, like, it's a communication platform and they haven't figured this out. It's just unbelievable. But yeah. Then instead of having a conversation, which we should, we now have to just wait and do lots of other stuff.
Sam,
And,
you never hooked up with Otter on your Zoom, did you?
Um,
Real-time closed captions.
Actually, no.
I don't see it offered.
What does that mean? I'm not kept up on that. Does that mean that Otter will automatically do something?
Well, not automatic. You have to tell it to turn it on. I think Zoom bought Otter.ai. So you go to Otter.ai and you register for free. And then after you're registered, you tell Otter that you want to have their service attached to your Zoom. And then they say, well, then tell us your Zoom coordinates. And then that makes them available. And then when you start Zoom, you have one more feature to turn it on in any given session. It's free. It's a little bit, bureaucratic to get it all set up, but it doesn't cost anything.
You're muted, Sam.
Okay, indeed. If it's free and it's helpful, I will go turn it on.
It'll take you 5 or 10 minutes to register at Otter because you got to sort of go through all the orientation stuff.
There's an apps button, and I click the apps button, but nothing's happening.
But does everyone have the notes in front of them in some other app?
Let's tell me the best place to go find it. It's on one of the web pages.
One place to find it, I can just put it into one of the messenger threads because they actually don't have that limit. And that is a really powerful reason for us to use Facebook Messenger.
So you're going to use the Messenger GCC barn raising thread.
Yeah, I can put
Okay,
it
maybe it's already
uh,
in there. Let's just see.
barn racing regulars, but
Oh, barn raising regulars. Wait a minute, there's more than one.
Or I could date. Yeah, GCC barn racing foundation.
Yeah, that's the one.
That's the one. Yeah. So
Yeah.
now I'll try to put everything in there.
Yeah, foundation laying regulars.
Yeah, you see, beautiful.
Yeah, there's the
This
whole
ac-
thing, right?
This actually works.
Yep.
So that means that
Yeah.
messenger threads is actually one of the best things for us to use.
No,
Yeah, and also I can put it on a second monitor.
It
you cannot
it's not,
search the history well, though. That's the problem.
that is the problem. But I'm thinking that as a part of the system, they're very good. But then you have to have something else for the history. So it's obviously not enough with messenger threads. But at least you can put in text,
But you can also do that in Google Docs, which is why I use Google Docs for these transcripts.
Yeah, but then I don't get a message immediately, right? To my
That's the
device.
level of involvement. That depends on the level of involvement. Like you put something in the messenger thread, that's kind of like throwing something on the community table.
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
At the
exactly.
cafeteria, right? And if you take it home with you and put it in and nurture it, and yeah, you're into a project then. Yeah, and then you get out other tools. But yeah, I do agree that as a commonplace, messenger does work pretty good as a common thing.
Yeah, it's like something that can keep the energy flowing, and then you kind of need to figure out somewhere else to store.
It's good for a first
Information.
draft, but it's not editable, and it gets hard to search Messenger after about a week.
Yeah.
This whole issue of whether posts are editable is almost a religious issue. I strongly feel that posts should not be editable. And I know other people feel very strongly that they should. So
you can view the edits, though. You can view the edit history on, at least on Facebook.
Yeah, that's right. Define post.
anything that actually is published, quote unquote.
Yeah, it's like Wikipedia. You can look at the history.
Yeah, there's a whole stage theory involved in the idea of publishing.
But, previous editions are visible on Wikipedia. They're visible on Facebook and other sites that have
visible on Facebook. You can't look at old versions, can you?
Yeah. If you click on the at the bottom, if it says edited, if you click on the word edited, it will bring up all the previous versions of that post.
I've never clicked on that.
Yeah. When you see the word edited, it means that it's been changed.
Yeah.
Click on the word edited. You'll see all the changes. It's still tedious because you'll see what looks like virtually identical versions of it with like a spelling check or punctuation check or something.
But it does show you the differences.
No, you don't get
yeah.
differences. You just get a sequence of all the versions.
Yeah, you
It's
get to
not
see
very
one of
good.
my messages form into common sense from gibberish.
Yeah, it's like an evolutionary process of a message.
If it does that, then I take back a lot of what I've said that disparages Facebook. Okay. However, if it does not show the actual diffs, then it's still not very useful.
No, you don't get the diffs. Like Wikipedia will give you the diffs between any two versions. You can select two versions and it'll show you the changes. That's pretty sophisticated.
And
It
obviously,
doesn't give you air miles either, though. Come on.
Air miles?
Well, I'm just saying it can't do everything, but I think that is pretty good, that it does keep the differences. Yeah, that's another thing that's worth noting is that people don't know that you can actually bookmark a specific reply in a comment thread.
see, none of those things are really discoverable. That's the problem.
Yeah, if you right click on the timestamp of a post
Yes.
or a reply, you can save a link and then you can post that and it'll have a breadcrumb trail right down to the comment.
And it's a huge, ugly link.
It's an ugly link. And it's something that you want to do between close friends, I guess.
Or mask it behind Control K.
It's yeah. Actually, your control Ks, I have to write a script on Google to reverse those for the tool, but we did it. I can't just copy a square and get the actual hyperlink. I had to write a Google script to go into the video sheet and actually reverse engineer that. And that wasn't
Okay.
easy. It was tricky.
Anyway, let's let Glenn go back on topic. We've been.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess we can jump into it soon. So yeah, so I'm supposing that most of us have looked at the notes because that was sort of the experiment. And so the challenge today is maybe we can do a round of where we first, each of us can say what is the one idea that struck us most from this dialogue. And so the challenge for today is basically, can we add something to these insights that was expounded in this dialogue, which could potentially move humanity in a positive direction? Could we add value to that dialogue? So that's the experiment. So first, there's a dialogue between two people in this case. Many people have listened to it. Some people have taken notes from it, have considered the notes. So in that sense, this conversation is a follow-up of that dialogue, and see if there's some insights that have been formed from considering this. So that's the challenge. And if we can, for example, co-create or develop or share at least one really good idea that can perhaps answer some of the questions that they asked in that dialogue, then I would consider the experiment a success. So, so I hope that that makes sense. That's basically the. And I know Colin has wrote all the text into his tool. So if we come up with something, we could.
Yeah, I'm glad. I was hoping this is what we were up to today. There's also the angle or the idea of what in the message really resonates with what we think the core values of the group might be and things that the group's trying to do. And, you know, I think how we enhance them is extending upon that idea. But I think just looking at the fundamental things and trying to see, you know, as a group or as people of interest, like if this message really resonates with somebody or if they're really about something else. And that extends to Doug and unblocking too as well.
Yeah, that's also useful, you know, way we can approach it. Like what idea here or what message here do we feel resonates with what we're trying to do here? So yeah, so there's quite a few have joined us. I don't know if Kayla can hear. She's here. Joshua just arrived. Stacy is here. So yeah, so maybe we can just start by doing a little round. So the first question I have is, what is the one idea in this dialogue between Daniel Schmachtenberger and Bret Weinstein, which stands out for you in some kind of way, or which interested you, or you would be interested in exploring further? So can just begin there. I could kick it off. One idea that struck it for me, which made an impression on me, was when he said, there is something like the spirit of science, a reverence and respect for reality, where I want to know what is real and be with what's real more than I want to hold a particular belief, no matter cherished or whatever in-group I'm a part of, or in the uncomfort of not belonging with the in-group. If I want to belong with anything, I actually want to have a belonging with reality first, a belonging with my own integrity, and then with those who also share that. And that's the other belongings that I give up. I don't stop caring about those people. I care about them still, but I don't necessarily care about their opinion of me enough that I'm willing to distort my own relationship with reality. So this is a mindset, and it seems to me that this mindset is a very promising beginning towards another idea, which they also discussed, which was the idea of cultural enlightenment. And so there's something that was also said towards the end, is that humanity now has the power of gods and needs to bind this power with the love and the wisdom of gods. Do we have examples historically of people who develop themselves cognitively and ethically to very high levels? Yes. Is it possible that if we did those together, this would be within human nature and basically untried? Yes. So this is the other idea. If one could develop the capacity in culture for wisdom, love and wisdom, it's the development of the human being's capability of collective intelligence. That happens at scale, but it begins with each person also developing their own understanding. And so this idea of a cultural enlightenment, as I understand it, is if many people can develop their own understanding to high levels, and then they can inform one another and assist one another in this process and inspire one another, then this can be a path for a bottom-up kind of cultural enlightenment. And the way I relate that to what's happening here is that communication technology is obviously a tool that could achieve this if we could use it well. So and that is a challenge, and it's a challenge that has to do with our own approach to it, our own attitude, our own conduct. And it also is many practical questions about what apps to use, how to use them, certain agreements that need to be made, and so on, certain processes, and so on. Yeah, so that was one big idea that stuck with me from that conversation. Beginning with this mindset of a reverence for reality first. So the possibility I see is, what if there could grow in culture a kind of super culture of people who are like truth seekers and who have this mindset and can then build from that. So yeah, let's do a round so anyone can continue. Stacy, go for it.
So that ties into the section that I just put in, which talks about comprehensive, high-quality education. Because, you know, it says, this must cover first person, second person, and third person epistemics. But we're not covering first and second person. Yeah, my mind is kind of going all over the place because I'm feeling a frustration, especially in certain tech spaces, that it's sort of the social components are an afterthought. We'll fix that later. And things don't work like that. In school, that's the one place where the social is tied into everything. Your behavior's constantly being monitored in school, and you're hearing about it. You're hearing about it from your peers, you're hearing about it from your teachers. We don't have that in the rest of the world, because, and you know, we could go into all the reasons about that. But again, I hear this mostly from mostly in male dominated spaces, that we can fix that part later. That part's not as important. And it's just the same thing I'm saying, you know, childcare is secondary issue. You know, yeah, I'm just too frustrated to speak right now.
Well, do you want to sort of elaborate on what you would like to see? Because, you know, I think to me it's obvious that childcare is, you know, almost the foundation for how the future will be. Right. So what would be the right education? Do you want to say something about that?
Yeah, Alex has his hand up. I'll just say one sentence first, and then Alex, you can go. What I'm saying is we should not just be looking for these things in education. Those components have to be woven into every aspect of our existence. That's what I'm saying. And let Alex go.
Yeah, Alex, go for it. What are the stands out for you?
The divide between people of various different ideologies, that's the bridge that needs to be crossed for humanity to survive. And getting there is a big ask, really. But watching that clip, watching that podcast, it struck me that a lot of the things they were discussing were right on the button for the emergence that I was talking about of the people power virtual cloud network of real people, and used to confirm they're real people and not fake people. There's a few simple things like having them on your friends list, people you know. It's simple as that. People you've had a relationship with online or offline, but through Zoom usually. But most people that live alone and don't get out much, it's Zoom calls. And you can pick up on people by sending them a message in a private chat or talking to them on Facebook groups and asking them questions and sharing links with them. If they have information they think would benefit you, that's the way you establish a deeper relationship with that person. And they obviously are in your network. They're in your virtual cloud network. So if you get a chance to publish their links on some blog that you write, you've strengthened that relationship in the AI cloud as well. As you killed two birds with one stone. You strengthen the network of the artificial intelligence and the bots that search the net looking for political information. They're digging to find out who's going to vote for me using sophisticated algorithms that they buy off the tech giants. So what we can do to affect that directly is to link our shit together and create this cloud network, global cloud network. It's all already happening now, but if you're not in it, you're not in it. And it's a shame to see so many people missing out on this. It's an opportunity to change the world. So, that was
Right.
a lot of the things I saw in that podcast reminded me of the suggestions I've been trying to make myself. But as I was watching it, I was aware of the fact that I wasn't taking notes. And I was also aware of the fact of my cognitive bias, because I was missing things that I hadn't picked up on before, or disregarding things as irrelevant that I didn't really think affected the future outcomes that I was looking for. So there was also a lot
Yeah.
of criticism there that affects the way I was relating to that. I should have, looking back, I should have been taking notes, because there was some good things there, and I probably will watch it again. Over.
Yeah, that's a big question whether we should take notes or not. Some people feel it helps them listen better. Others find it difficult to both write and listen. But I guess that linkage would also be a vision of a kind of an education that's decentralized. We talked a bit about that before. Seems to also depend on what content is and the process and many things. So yeah, let's continue going around. Picked up a few ideas already. Heiner, Sam, Barry, Thais, Colin, Josh, Kayla, any of you have any ideas that stick out?
Yeah, the one thing that stuck out for me was the reciprocal problem that defeats the effort to make things scientific and grounded in reality. And that's this, we live in a sea of bullshit. And we know that a lot of stuff that comes across our transom is opinion, that's just personal opinion. Some of it's misinformation, some of it's disinformation. And the challenge of sorting out the reliable information from the unreliable information is overwhelming. And although there are tools and techniques for detecting and weeding out bullshit, it also gets into the problem of gatekeeping, because then you got to do gatekeeping to eliminate the stuff that's bullshit. And then you have disputes over whether something is worthy of being included or excluded. And then you have a controversy, and the controversy is a real thing. So then you put the controversy in, which includes the truth and the misinformation. So you have this really complicated problem of how do you reliably sort out the reliable information from misinformation, disinformation, without being educated in science. We have some people, a very small minority of the population, who have a profoundly deep education in science and scientific thinking and scientific processes. And then you have the vast majority of the people who don't have very much exposure to science and haven't developed the faculties of scientific thinking. And you're not going to exclude them. I mean, in a democracy, they have a vote too, but their vote could be very well uninformed. So this is a really serious problem. We have an unscientific culture. What are you going to do about it?
Yeah, sure is. Stacy?
I also want to add to what Barry's saying, that we have to accept that there are some people that are really, really intelligent, that have the ability to do those things, but don't even have their own level of self-awareness. And they are not as objective as they sometimes think. I feel like I deal with a lot of those people who are brilliant, but they don't leave any opening that some of what they're pushing away might actually be true.
Yeah, it's a very complex problem.
Well, and that is adding to the polarity. Because if I'm talking to somebody and they're not listening to a word I say, there can't be anything that I'm saying that's true. That's going to make me push harder, and it's going to push us further away from each other.
Yeah, polarization, absolutely.
Heiner's hand is up.
Yeah,
Yes.
Heiner, go for
I
it.
also follow up on Barry. You see, I just came across the history of German explorers in Atacama, in Chile, in Africa, in the Sahara, and the Gobi and Taklamakan Desert. And these explorers found out that the people they learned about have the same words, but on a different level of outside knowledge and inside knowledge, or secretive knowledge, or insider knowledge. And so just struggling over words was totally wrong, because it was obvious to the people who were there in which context someone would understand it. But by just following the words, you totally have totally opposite meanings when you are on a different level of awareness or insider. If you are a spiritual person or a practical person or an alien. So I really felt we should go beyond the ideologies to really look into the context of words, to their meaning.
That's another big issue, definitely. Yeah, Sam, got your hand up?
Okay, so first I'm going to apologize for not having read those notes before the session. I will also confess that I did read the notes during the session, and so that distracted me a little bit from what you're talking about. So if that's against the rules, I'm confessing I did that, okay? However, I went from your notes, Glenn, which are very good notes, and I highlighted those items which I really wanted to call out for discussion, either singly or in bulk, okay? And I like a lot of what is being said, a lot about checks and balances in government, about education, but I find a few things that I would tend to disagree with, and those are the ones that I wanted to flag for discussion at the moment, because it could be my misunderstanding, but it could also be a real issue that might clog things down. There's a statement somewhere in there that technology and or science needs to be guided by values and principles and that sort of thing. I actually think that's a very limited view. See, I think if you are both a scientist and a systems thinker, values derive. And I think that is not well appreciated and well understood.
Wait, can you say that again? Value derive?
Values derive from systems thinking and scientific thinking. It doesn't have to come from religion. It doesn't have to come from ethics. It doesn't have to come from, old motherhood stories and that sort of thing. They don't, okay? If you actually ask good questions and say, what happens at the extreme? Or what happens with time? Or what happens if this is 0? Or what happens if this is 1? Or what happens if this is infinity? You will get natural outcomes according to what you know, which is based on science, based on experience, okay? And that, which you can extrapolate based on systems thinking and based on scientific understanding and based on knowledge of people, et cetera, can give you a way to inform behavior, which is really what values are, in the most fundamental. They're trying to inform your best behavior. So if you know that, for example, if I know that my best mental model says, if we continue along this path, there will be no trees in 100 years, okay? And if we know that trees provide oxygen for survival of the species, then it doesn't have to be a value that's taught to say trees are good. It's a systemic outcome. It's a scientific outcome. It's a thinking outcome that says we must preserve trees. Same with, mushrooms. Same with ocean life, same with a number of other things. So this notion that values are distinct from systems thinking and from science is erroneous.
Yeah, I didn't hear them say that, did they?
Yes.
Distinct
it was in your notes, and in fact, I could even highlight where they are.
Yeah, if you could highlight that part, that would be great.
Yeah. Okay.
Can you give us the first words of the paragraph that you're referencing?
I'll find it, but I'm on a roll here, so I'm going to go.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay.
Yeah, keep rolling.
Okay. there's a number of points made where I just found myself naturally typing global sim, okay? And I did that probably maybe half a dozen times throughout your notes. So in other words, this notion of good risk analysis in complex, unpredictable situations is one of the fundamental principles behind what I was proposing in Global SIP, which is not just a sea of knowledge, but it's basically a way of organizing it so it becomes executable and predictive knowledge, okay? And making things transparent is also one of the fundamental tenets under Global SIM. And this whole notion of transparency, either in blockchain or in other kinds of mechanisms for checks and balances, is also key in, it's mentioned a number of times in your notes as well.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. The next opportunity of mentioning that is, this design notion of real versus imagined trade-offs. You write down the possibility of synergistic satisfiers, okay? And that really, that predictive notion of putting the best of our collective knowledge together and all of us doing different versions of, hooking it together so that it begins to make predictions to executing that knowledge. That is the core idea of Global SIM. And that is why I wanted to present it in that way, so that anybody could contribute to this global what if. Okay, think of Global SIM as a global what if platform. Okay, it's also a platform for systems thinking. Okay, at all levels of granularity of modeling and framing. Let's see.
That was, where was that again? I'm trying to find that, because that was a very interesting point about how in design we often end up, we stop the search process for designs at a way too early stage.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to find where that is.
Well, there's again the same mistake of science being corruptible, where I really want to remind people it's the institutions and the people involved that are corruptible. Science itself, the principles, are not corruptible. If you understand.
Well, I think that Bret Weinstein made this point that science as a social institution is very easily corrupted by market forces.
If you look institutions and people, that's the problem. Is if you institutions and people, and then you say science is corruptible, you don't understand science. You're only talking about people and institutions, where it's basically a given that those institutions and people are corruptible. That's not a knock against science. Okay, in fact, it's something about science, that particular statement.
Well, is it a knock against sort of saying that science in that sense kind of doesn't exist? That science, the way you describe it, pure science that purely follows the scientific method, it doesn't really exist in the world because it's always people and it's incentives.
No, not everyone is corrupt. That's the whole point. And if you only focus on the institutions and people that are corrupt, then you're not really looking at the totality. There's many people who've actually practiced science well. And why focus on the people who've practiced science badly?
Right.
Like, but I mean, many people who practice religion well. And we should not just focus purely on knocking those who practice religion badly.
Of course, but I think it's the same issue there, right? That individuals practice things well, but once you have an institutionalized structure, it seems that those structures are very vulnerable to many forces, especially market forces.
I only disagree. They're only vulnerable to corruption if built in is that 11th commandment of thou shalt not question, which you correctly, or someone correctly identified, okay? The fundamental difference between science and religion is science encourages and welcomes questions. Religion, in many practices and the common practice, seems to not.
Well, are you sure about that? As far as I understand it, both science and religion says that they love questioning, and in actuality, it's very, very difficult for a professor to even become a professor by going far outside of the established thinking. I mean, they address this. Does science as a social institution, as an actual social institution, does it encourage asking radical questions?
It does. That's the problem. You're looking at people still. You're not looking at science.
Okay, so are they being rewarded for doing that, would you say?
Not by science. They're being rewarded by salaries, positions, titles, published papers, those metrics, but not by science.
But are they rewarded by their scientific community for challenging the assumptions of that community? Because if the answer to that question is no, then that science of which you speak doesn't actually exist. That's the whole issue, isn't it?
My question is, do you want me to keep going on my litany of observations?
Yeah.
Or shall we get...
You can keep going, then Josh has something, but yeah, keep going a little more.
Okay. There's also a mention of decentralized blockchain ledger technologies to, sort of bring in this openness, this transparency, okay? Which again, in the formulation of Global SIM is fundamental in that all of this is shareable. Everybody can take any element of the collected knowledge and tweak it and refine it and improve it and resubmit it back to the global repository and then re-execute it, and everybody can leverage it. So again, that's another mechanism built into Global SIM at the core, okay? Another thought which I had big problems with is this statement that humanity now has the power of gods and needs to bind this power with the love and wisdom of gods. From what I've seen about gods, they don't necessarily love and practice wisdom. And there's a lot of human frailty that's just reflected in gods. So I think this is a mistaken myth that we need to divorce ourselves from. I've seen more humans actually love than gods. So I don't want to even just give lip service to this notion of gods being good. Okay, gods are made in man's creation. Okay.
God images, basically. Yeah.
Do we need to prove that in this context?
I'm just giving you my notes and observations here for now. Okay, you guys can do it whatever you want.
I don't know if he means gods in the terminology of common people going to church. I think he means gods as the Einstein God.
Yeah, there's extremely powerful creative forces that can create worlds.
He does not, because I mean, I admit I haven't seen that portion of the video, but the notes that Glenn wrote are verbatim this: humanity now has the power of gods and needs to bind this power with a love and wisdom of gods. That is not the Spinozan God. That is not the Einsteinian God. Okay.
Well, I think that can be discussed. I mean, the point is basically we have incredible powers, but we don't have the love and wisdom that corresponds to those powers, and that's a big problem.
His example is genetic mutation of humans.
But let's come back to this a little bit later. We'll come back to this. So, Josh, you had something.
Yeah, thank you. I just I heard you mention a word that got glossed over, and I just wanted to bring it up. Is you said, does the community? I think what you said was, do they acknowledge, or what was it? Do you remember what you said, Glenn? Does the community acknowledge that person's objective to a statement of reality and thus doing science?
Yeah, I think I can say it. So the idea is basically, in a scientific community, let's say psychologists. If you're a psychologist, if you do work that strongly goes against the established perspectives of your peers, will you then be rewarded for that? Will your peers say, great work, I'm going to reconsider my assumptions here because you're making some good points? Or will you effectively be shunned by your peers and say, this guy's a loony? The point I wanted to make is, if the reality is that in those expert communities, people get punished for challenging the established points of view, then the science that Sam spoke about doesn't actually exist. It doesn't exist as a social institution. Maybe it exists in the minds of individuals. Maybe it exists as a potential sometime in the future, but it doesn't exist as a social structure. That was the point I wanted to make. If the reality is that people aren't actually encouraged to question assumptions. So yeah, did you have a thought about that?
Yeah, I absolutely do. And thanks for clarifying that, because I just want to be clear that we're talking about what we think something is, not what something actually is. So science, if you create a hypothesis and it goes against all established beliefs, then you have to go through the scientific process of proving that hypothesis with the scientific method. So it doesn't matter whether your hypothesis is believed or not believed, it's can you prove it through the scientific method? And that method is to have a study where you have clear agreement on the method that you're using and the tools that you're using to measure objective reality. And I think that's the most important thing is if I do a science experiment and it turns out to be true, can that be replicated by other people in the community and they do it themselves and they come to their own conclusion that that hypothesis is true? And that, I think, is where we're all arguing, is because we haven't done the actual experiments ourselves. So if I did an experiment where a balloon raises off the ground and floats in the air, and Alex does the same experiment and the balloon just stays on the ground, we don't have a scientific method. We're not doing science at that point, and things become subjective. And Alex says, I blew into the balloon and it did not rise off the ground. And I say, well, in my experiment, I put helium into the balloon and it rose off the ground. And Alex says, well, I didn't know you had to use helium. That wasn't clear. And that's where I think we're kind of arguing about all these points, is we're not replicating reality and we're not sharing how, like Sam just said, a God is subjective. It's not an objective thing, it's a subjective thing. And so we can't talk about subjective things in science because it just doesn't work. If I think that air from my lungs makes a balloon go up and I say, no, you have to use helium, and Alex doesn't have access to helium or doesn't even know what helium is, he can't replicate that scientific experiment. Does that make sense? That we need to be able to communicate. I think number one, without communication of the methodology of the experiment and without replicating it ourselves, we'll never know what's real. Meaning anyone can make any hypothesis about anything and come up with their fake science, pseudoscience. Oh, thank you, babe.
Yeah, I get what you're saying. That's a perfect point.
But add that, take the word science and add that to every discipline: the science of photography, the science of communication, the science of systems thinking. If you can't replicate the way that I came to my conclusion in a systems thinking model, and I think Barry has mentioned this quite a bit, is a lot of science is modeling something and coming up with that hypothesis and then testing it out with multiple different observations, multiple different experiments to see if that model can hold true, not just in one place, but in all places. And if you really want to get objective, from every single person, there's not one person on this planet that can't replicate that scientific experiment and get the same results. Now, if there's someone out there, it doesn't matter to me what community, whether it be a stringent, a community where people are fascists and telling you can't even do the experiment, and they do the experiment. If you can replicate it and it's true, that is science. Anything else is pseudoscience and bullshit. If everybody can't do the same experiment on their own.
Exactly. I get your point. Then, of course, some would say that of course limits the scope of science because there's many areas where that's not possible. But yeah, let's keep going into this.
That's a great point.
Yeah,
That's a great point, because you have to have certain tools to replicate it. And if you don't have access to that, that's where I think we're all arguing about science. Is if someone says the world is flat and I say the world is round, and someone's been into a spacecraft up above the atmosphere, they know the world is round. They've seen it with their own eyes. They experienced it. But if I can't
think
replicate going up into space,
I think there's other much harder issues than that one. But yeah, let's flag this a little. I think Alex and Stacy has something.
thank you so much.
It's really interesting. We'll keep going into it. Alex, what do you got?
I put some alfoil in a bottle and a little bit of acid and put the balloon over it, and it produced helium, and the balloon flew up in the air. Anyway, that's science. And I didn't work that out myself. I had to learn it from a teacher. So I was a student. We're all students of life. Thank you, Josh. Over.
Great, yeah. So Stacy.
Yeah, I want to go back to the original point that Sam started with. I mean, I agree with everything basically that's been said everywhere, but I just want to point out where values might make a difference in science. And that has to do with the questions that we start to explore first, because there are zillions of questions to be explored. And if your values are, for example, I'll give a perfect example. We know that stress and poverty and violence and mental health are all related. But if we're not people-centered and we're working in the name of science, but not even paying attention to that, subconsciously, science is being directed by values. And I think that it's those things we're not aware of that we have to look out for. So I understand, Sam being upset that, it's not a values thing, but there's a lot of unconscious thinking and acting going on. And that includes scientists. The same way, if you look at the spiritual community, there are people that can quote the Bible backwards and forwards. They might be the experts in scripture, but that doesn't mean that they're embodying that and living that. So I just want to.
Yeah, that's a good one. And just before you go, Sam, I'll clip this part in, because I don't know if this was the part you disagreed with, or at least it seems that this is the part that challenges a little bit this view that you described. I'll write it. The Tao that can be named is not the eternal Tao. The model of reality is not reality. This has a corollary in the Jewish principle: do not worship false idols. Those gods you spoke about within this perspective be false idols that people have created in their minds. And science is great at understanding the is, but not the ought. Technology can be great for achieving a given goal, but not inform us about what goals are worth pursuing. That's a big one. Or ethical behavior. This means, I think Schmachtenberger said this means that what we optimize for cannot be measured. This is a crucial point. This is the key criticism that comes up again and again and again of this point of view, that we can fix it all with science, because it's all resting on measurement. But if the key element can't even be measured, then we have to address that. So, and this was why he concluded wisdom can be viewed as the difference between the optimization function and the right choice. So that there will always be something which is outside the model that makes the choice of what's important. So if you could follow up on that, Sam, that would be great.
Yes, thank you. This is actually, I think, a key point. And this is where I think I get slings and arrows, okay? Because I do believe that values, if they are, let's say, unexplainable, then they're not truly understood. If you cannot explain values by showing how those values, when they're being embraced, affect behavior and therefore affect outcome and therefore affect the future, then you don't really understand, okay? But if you can show that, if you can show what the future holds, if you believe in some value, call it love, call it compassion, call it, patience, whatever, and then you can demonstrate how that behavior is affected by that and trace it all the way out, okay? Then that's systems thinking. That's not just values, just popping into someone's head, and in effect, values and wisdom are compiled knowledge through experience and oral history. All values and all wisdom has come through a history of observation. They didn't just pop into existence. We didn't just all of a sudden, have 10,000 people on the planet all about thinking, oh, well, geez, we should love each other. It didn't happen that way. It happened because certain people treated others badly, certain people treated others well. All of a sudden now they get words to, characterize that behavior, and all of a sudden this word love bubbles up. If you didn't have all of that history, love would, as a word, be almost meaningless. So I still believe that this systems thinking, this historical thinking, this context thinking, this notion of knowledge being executable and being predictive and being explanatory on the past is what gives us meaning to these values. They are not abstract and standing alone on themselves. They're hooked to a lot of experience and a lot of observation. So to give them this reverence that they're just magical and we should just embrace them and we should just adopt them and they are commandments, is non-systemic thinking in my view.
Give what reverence to?
This notion of values as being sort of abstract, being, enlightened, being, handed from the universe, being taught from, mores and morals, from the elders. That.
Well, what about if it's just not explainable or it can't be captured in a model?
It absolutely can be. I can model systems where you have people with low compassion. I can model, systems where you have people with high compassion. I can do it with any value.
And that's questionable to me.
Give the man a slider.
Okay? Too much is focused on this word measurement. Okay? I will replace the word measurement with observation. Observation is everywhere. Observation is being done all the time. People don't think they're measuring all the time, but they're always observing. Observations are measurements, whether you know them or not.
Yeah, observation is a good word. Just also wanted to add here what Heiner said earlier. It's important to remember just the vast differences in the contexts in how we understand terms, which also makes this complicated. Barry, did you have something you wanted to say here? Or it seemed like
I guess
you
I
had.
could sort of do it in reverse order. Yeah, observation, I agree, is a very important word. If you look at feedback control systems, which is a major component of systems thinking, if you cannot observe something, you cannot control it. You can make a controller, but if the controller doesn't know the current state of the system, it has no information to say, which way should I turn the wheel? So observation is fundamental to systems thinking, especially feedback control theory. Now, Sam used a word a minute ago, slings and arrows. And that brings up a very interesting point because there are pioneers in every discipline. There are pioneers in science. There are pioneers in governance. There's pioneers in the arts. There's an old joke. You know how to tell a pioneer? They're the ones with the arrows in their back.
Yeah.
I called you pioneer last week, I think, Barry.
Want to see the arrows in my back?
All I could
Yeah.
find in my ear was a bit of wax.
Yeah, I've been abused of having earwax. I can hear people, but I don't believe them because it comes across as bullshit. And they say, "Oh, you have wax in your ears." Well, and that also gets back to this point of using metaphors, because in our culture, we use a lot of metaphors, and metaphors are not literally true. They're suggestions about how to think about something in terms of something else you already know well. And it's very commonplace to use a metaphor and the other person takes it as a concrete, literal term and says that's nonsense. And I don't know any way around that, except it's a very commonplace disconnect in narrative conversations.
Yeah, that's a great point. And also it came to me something that Bret Weinstein also said here was that there's a black box in the scientific method, and that's the question of how you come up with hypotheses.
Right, imagination. How does
That's
imagination work? We know there's such a thing. Can you characterize the mechanism of imagination?
And then there's another issue. How do we relate with the unknown or the undiscovered possibilities that have never been seen before? I mean, can we use that kind of thinking that's based on making predictions to kind of find out where it's worth looking? I mean, I mean, I just feel that there has to be an area here where something like intuition, something you just can't you grasp it, but that's what guides really brilliant people. If they can somehow have something like that, maybe that's the wisdom Schmachtenberger talks about, and then they can combine it with an ability to test and measure. Did you want to say something about this, Sam? Or anything?
I had one more point to make from the notes, okay? And that is this notion of political correctness. The acceptance of alternate thinking is fundamental to political correctness, which is tolerance to, you know, a damaging extreme. If we tolerate viewpoints which cannot be explained or which cannot be substantiated by either story or by evidence or by history or by experience, then that to me is at best a waste of time. And at worst, basically, it's allowing false thinking to take hold. And if that takes hold in one person, then two, and then four, then 8, then that begins to be damaging to society. And that's what leads, you know, to alternate facts. That's what leads to, well, my truth, quote unquote, is valid. And that is where we have dangerous, dangerous questions about what truth really is. There should not be that deep misunderstanding of what truth is. And that's why I always encourage the use of the word experience versus my truth. Anytime I hear someone say my truth, you know, a yellow flag, maybe even a red flag is going to go up. Because if you allow people to talk about my truth, and then you're allowing them to use that word truth will be abused. And that will then lead to much misunderstanding and, in fact, danger in society. So this notion of tolerating other viewpoints, even if they're unfounded, is poison to society. I want to make that very, very explicit. If people are spouting bullshit and cannot substantiate what they're saying, that should be squashed. Now, on the other hand, we need to understand when it's a true inquiry based on authentic curiosity versus misinformation. There is some judgment there. There is some notion there that is very, very valuable. But most of the time, especially when you contest the source, can space test the source of some of these alternate facts, you can tell whether or not they're thinking based on authentic scientific inquiry or whether it's just attempts at control and attempts at abusing and corrupting this notion of truth. That is very important to me. That should be very important to society. And if the word truth cannot stand, then we cannot have transparency. We cannot actually have real scientific inquiry. And then society is essentially, a bunch of special characters. Over.
Yeah. There's definitely a few, like for example, in the vaccine debate, would be a good example of there's certain kinds of question which we should be able to actually get to the truth. But there's also other issues where that's maybe a lot harder. But let's put that aside for the moment. But at least in some issues, we could get to the truth.
I know I'm out of order, but since you bring that one example up, let me at least say one more thing. If indeed the anti-vaccine crowd is truly interested in the truth, okay, one of them by now would have taken the vaccine, done a gas chromatograph or other kind of analysis on it, and really look for these little microcircuitry nanorobots that are actually trying to control us.
Yeah, there's a few assumptions. I think there's many kinds of vaccine skeptics. Not everyone believes in the nanorobot, but Colin has had his hand up for a long time.
My point is just any of those claims can be tested and can be verified if indeed they were really interested in truth. Over.
Yeah, many of them certainly should or could, But Colin, did you have something? You need to unmute.
Spacebar didn't work. Okay. Yeah, very interesting. I see a large branch of a discussion starting that Sam has pushed back against some of the principles as he's seen them in a list. And I think it's interesting that from what I understand, Sam hasn't seen the video before, and that's the first time he's read the list, or he's seen the video before, but he just read the list. That's one thing I'm interested in. Because the difference between seeing something written than seeing the person and their body language actually express it with the nuance. And the reason I say that is because two things can happen. They can actually manipulate the conversation either positively or negatively, depending on what the criteria are. So if they're very convincing because they're great narrators and they use music in the background, then Sam got a better impression because they didn't catch him with all the choir, you could say, and the organ music and whatever they do to make the ambiance. So it's an emotional experience. So when someone's trying to tell you a story or explain something to you, sometimes they put a lot of marketing into it to try to get you to believe what they believe too. That's one thing I really like about Noam Chomsky. He never, ever seemed to cross that line with all the things he had to say. It was always, you can go check the facts yourself. If you don't believe me, go have a look, go look it up yourself. I don't really like to listen to people who get all emotional because they're just, adding drama that's unnecessary to the situation. He talks almost about everything with the same tone of voice. Put you right to sleep if you're not paying attention. So I think that what I'd like to say is that when I listened to it, it rang the same with me as it did with Alex. I really appreciated what they were saying. I felt like I wanted to get behind and learn more about the Consiliency Project. I was very interested that there's some people in my Archain group that are actually, one or two connections away from Daniel Schmachtenberger, which is interesting. That's the effect that Joshua was talking about with Clubhouse. So, we really can listen and come up with some good questions. So, and my questions are, can we back up? Is it worth it to have another look at Sam's objections? Since, I think Sam is one of the leading sense makers of the group, a founder of, the barn raising, and Schmachtenberger's kind of on the other side. I see Nora Bateson. I think, Sam seen something there. So I think there is opportunities to back up and hear what the person actually said and then engage. So that's kind of like warm data, not going back in the rear view mirror so much as trying to dig up old stuff, but trying to understand what newly has been said, what we're trying to sense make. So, and that's, the valid time around the now, the future and the past, and it's all the now when it's relevant, right? Like this week, this month, this year, this era. So, however you want to, and I do think that Stacy and Sam are both very, I would say, not centered on the arguments that they're giving, as centered as they think they are. That's the criticism that they're giving other people. So maybe that's the way we all are.
Can you say more about that? Because I don't know what you mean. You could
Well,
speak to me specifically.
Yeah, well, you specifically about the conversations that we've had about dismissing possibilities, and the same conversation with Glenn, really. Just two different people, two different adapters to the same conversation about not dismissing possibilities. And you just got to be careful about, to me, the confidence level of what you're claiming, if you're claiming anything. If you're just leaving the door open, that's fine. But there's only so much time to stand by an open door. There's stuff to do, right? So you can express that there's possibilities, but you actually have to make some sense out of the fact that you're not sure if those possibilities are true. And once you say, well, I don't really know if it's true or not, I just feel it could be true, then you just make sure it doesn't dismiss any other possibilities, like the dominoes. So that's kind of the idea.
I'm sorry, in what way am I not centered on that argument?
Well, I think that you think that I'm not centered on the argument. So it's just different. You said, you would.
But that doesn't answer my question. How I think about you does not answer the question of how you think I'm not centered on that argument.
I think you're spending too much time in the open doorway, right?
Okay, so that, if I can just jump in, because my hand's been up a really long time.
You go for it.
Because it actually ties in. I wanted to push back on something Sam said. I wish he was here. I don't know if he's in the vicinity. But I just wanted to highlight how, okay, good. Thank you. Because you were very, forceful on your whole idea of truth and whose truth and how it should be shut down. And I was thinking, I know you have great respect for the Dalai Lama. I've heard you quote him, but has he proven anything to you? And not even to you. There are a whole bunch of people that would have the opinion of, well, prove it. So does that mean he should be shut down? And I know you don't mean that. I'm just trying to bring up another way to look at things. Like,
I'm trying to understand the question, because he's not made any statement that I would actually need to ask him to prove.
You wouldn't, but I'm trying to say, put yourself in someone else's shoes and this whole idea of shutting down conversation, because you made a point of saying, if somebody doesn't have proof to back up what they're saying, shut them down. And I'm just saying that's a little bit absolute, because how would we feel when it's applied to somebody like the Dalai Lama?
Same way.
Wait a minute.
I'd like to jump onto that, because that's really relevant to the fact that, okay, if you're saying I want to stand in this doorway longer and say, this might be possible, and Sam says, okay, tell me some more about it. And you say, well, I can't really tell you more, but I got to wait in the doorway. And eventually you have to move on. And, that's the point. Like, how much time, effort, filtering do you put into holding open the possibility of everything? And then you say, well, not everything, but, and then you say, well, but what? And then it never gets defined. It's just something possible.
Okay.
And that's not a thing. That's not a thing.
But wait a minute, but this also goes back to what people were just saying about imagination, because how we decide which questions get explored. First of all, I agree. There's not time to do one thing at a time. There just isn't. There's too many questions. But if there could be a little bit more equality in what direction scientific method gets supported in, like somebody mentioned earlier, that a psychologist working in a certain field might not get the support they need to do their research. If we could have a greater equality of the directions where we still apply the scientific method, but we're a little bit more open to where we might want to test it out. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so. There's also a distinction here, isn't it, between sort of those who stand in the doorway, or they're interested in something personally. Maybe they'll even say, I think there's something very interesting here that you have to access through a direct experience. It's not easy to explain it. There's that, and there's the people who make very strong claims about things, and even very specific things, and sometimes very
Oh,
loudly.
shit. Sorry, Twitch. Probably nobody watching.
Yeah, Stacey?
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
sorry. No, I got another stream going.
It's fine. Yeah, Stacey, go for it.
think what's underneath a lot of what I'm saying is that there's like an invisible power dynamic thread that goes throughout everything. And if I would find it interesting, I'm going to go back and watch the first half hour of this call, because I actually saw a power dynamic playing out that I don't know if anybody else noticed. But, and again, it's not intentional, and it's not in line with the values we put forward. And it's not to say that anybody's bad. What I'm trying to say is that at every moment, we can't see what we're doing. I can't always be monitoring my own behavior if I am engaged in acting. And so to think that any one of us can do that is silly. And yet we kind of weed out all the mechanisms for checks and balance as we have it in school, we have it in play, we have it in our social life. But once it gets to business related types of things, we don't have those checks and balances. And we're gonna, as far as I'm concerned, we're just gonna keep making the same mistakes all throughout history that we've always made.
Yeah, it's
I wasn't quite finished, and
okay.
it kind of all flows, which is good, because so there's that part of people being on different extremes or in the center of open-mindedness or rationality or whatever you call it, balanced opinion, whatever that is. It's not a real thing, right? Like Sam's saying, you can't give it a value, but you can observe, collect data, and track it out within your own environment. So, there is no absolute truth in that way, as we are, what things defy physics, right? So is there anything that Daniel and Bret are talking about that defy physics, first of all? Okay, because that's a flag for me when somebody says, here's my system, and poof, there's a little magic in the middle of it, right? And that's why standing in the doorway is holding a bag for magic, right? And waiting for it to pop in. And then you'll say, oh, now see, here it is. Now I can show you. But until then, if there's not enough definition around it, you can't extend the arm waving of plastic words to actually hold that thing in existence. I don't think. No. So that's the thing. But definitely on the other side of things, when you do have, like when Sam was talking to Doug, if you got some preconception of what's happening, you can hook into the next thing that you're doing, or you can reach back and grab relevant information and bring it forward. And that was a big thing that I want to see resolved between Doug and Sam, because those two have watched each other's videos. So I'm saying, can we go back and pick the parts that I would like to say, Sam, if we're going to be able to be aligned and feel like Chi brothers, then I got to know why you disagree with this about Schmachtenberger, because I think you've got it. You don't have him wrong, because I don't hear him saying what you're saying. And is there some hard boundaries there? And so where are the disagreements? Where are the agreements? And how does coexistence play into that? Because I think we could be a great force for the consilency. Even though we might have problems with stage theory analysis being colonial as a dramatic offering to the world, which was very interesting from Nora Bateson.
Yeah.
And it's still going on. So, you know,
I have a
how do we-
question about that.
how do we,
actually.
yeah, so how do we coexist and join and support each other if we don't even know clearly? And, you know, through repetition, iteration, or like Stacy says, I want to watch this video again. The first thing I thought in this video people were complaining about, I thought in my head was, how do you know we don't already have a lot of that? And Stacy said something. I go, oh, geez, how do you know we don't already have a lot of that? Like you say, what we need. And I say, how do you know? I think we already have a lot of that. So, you know, but I
Okay.
couldn't interrupt.
But
But I could in a
anyway.
retrospective.
But maybe that's the answer right there. You think we
Hmm.
do, I think we don't. So maybe.
You do what though? But we do what? Like
I don't know what you're talking about.
yeah, but I know if I
Um,
watched the video back, the same thought would come back to me right at that moment. I'd say, again, how do you know we don't have these things? Aren't you taking a lot for granted? Because in
Have
my
what
value
things?
system,
From
Have
my
what
point
things?
of view, Colin, that's the point. From my point of view, you're going to have a different point of view. Sam's going to have a different point of view. Every person in the world is going to have a slightly different.
that's not the point.
of
How do
view.
I
It's
see?
the point?
How do I?
The goal is to get all those points of view to somehow fit into the right combination of placement.
Well, I don't know about combination, but into view so they can be observed properly. Yes.
But anyway, I feel we're kind of floating a little here. I don't even know what we're talking about at this point. I have a
Well,
question.
let me summarize then, because I think it's very important. What are our disagreements and agreements between Sam's rebuttal and what Schmachtenberger is trying to say? Specifically, if we could go over line item, like play what they actually said in the group, and maybe, you know, take a 30 minutes every Saturday and play the next Schmachtenberger clip, and we can discuss it, and we'll get through the whole video eventually. I don't know.
Keep in mind, it's not a rebuttal to Schmachtenberger. It's basically my reaction to Glenn's notes, which may be something else.
Okay, yeah, that's right. That's right. So we're once away. So I've got the video queued here to go with this Dao Ching stuff, and maybe we could play 50 of
I
the
think
things
that's
that.
pretty almost exact quote from Schmachtenberger, what I wrote there. A lot of it is
I've searched
almost
for it.
exact quotes.
Which video was that quote from that you put in the Dao that can be named? Because I got.
It's the video that we're talking about today. His conversation with Bret.
Okay, then let me
Weinstein.
go find out what the exact words are, because I know you can edit them to make them more sensible sometimes. but they
Yeah,
speak
maybe
well.
maybe I edited a little bit, but that was just like it was
Yeah,
almost what
I
he
usually
said,
put
I'm
that stuff in
pretty
square
sure.
brackets. I put that stuff in square brackets so that.
But
they know that
I
I
have
did
a
it.
little question here because I feel that it's been a little floaty. I think it's a really good example was brought up, and that was Nora Bateson's criticism of stage theory, because I've considered this quite a lot. And on the one hand, some people say that, you know, things have a tendency to go in stages, so on and so forth, and it's an accurate observation that this happens. Therefore, we should have stage theory. There's many other reasons too, but I found her argument extremely convincing, because it was so simple. It was just that our minds can't hold these models. That was the point. And because when we begin to take these models seriously of stage theory, then we begin to see ourselves and others occupying different steps on this ladder. And it immediately, and this ties very much in with everything Doug's been speaking about, it's almost like we're swimming in it. And we begin reducing complex people to a category. And it can be argued that the whole question of race and racism comes from this. Like, would we have racism at all if there wasn't this tendency to reduce people to a category? It's a very deep issue. And it has immense consequences. And one of her arguments was that even the really sophisticated stage theorists who, you know, could talk a whole day about how all these stages can be understood only in context and so on and so forth, you can see in their behavior that they're also doing the same thing to one another and to others. And they're actually viewing people through a very judgmental lens and a very reductive lens. And the reason I want to mention this is because it brings up a very different aspect of models. And that is that models, they're not just something that predicts external events. They form our minds. So there's consequences of models. And if I become sufficiently fascinated by a model, then my whole psyche can be formed inside of that model. It can become like a prison. And I think that that's a concern. I'm incredibly concerned about this. I think that our whole culture is suffering immensely from this. And this is, I don't see that concern when I'm hearing Sam speak. I think you're underestimating that concern. Or not just you, but this whole mentality that tries to always think about models and predictions and so on. You're underestimating the way these models actually change our own minds in ways we don't even know, and limit us in ways we don't even know. That's one example. The other example, I'll take the other example later. Yeah, you can respond.
I know Alex is
Sam.
asking for a while.
Yeah, Alex, you can go first, and then Sam.
Okay. I was thinking about the complexity in the scientific circles of this notion of truth, and how individual scientists have a objective and a rational truth, a rational approach to subjective analysis of truth, being it on occasion objective. And they distinguish it on purpose because the personal belief is like a subjective exercise for that person. Yeah. So it's a deep hole. It's one I try to avoid going down. I find my own subjective truth to be suitable for my scientific rational opinions. If I use my bias, cognitive bias, to the extent that it's capable of going, I can get myself into deep water. But if I don't, if I analyse carefully from a presence observation point of view, why I'm thinking about what I'm thinking about, I can analyse my motive. I can see more clearly what the objective is and whether or not there's a degree of bias interfering with the view that I'm having. It's like disenfranchising myself from the objective so I can see the layout better from a scientific viewpoint, from an observation viewpoint of an experimenter, just to see what would happen. And you can calculate things. You can have this thing called foreseeability, which comes from a long analysis of the historical data. I
hear a lot of people speak about that, but can we do it? Are we actually capable of seeing our own bias? It doesn't seem so simple. Yes, Sam.
Okay, so let me take up your question, okay, which is this idea about models being limiting. And then models are essentially, what you're implying is part of our entire identity, okay?
Yeah, yeah, that's right. They become sticky.
I would say that's not a problem with model-based thinking. That's a problem of people and their egos, okay? If someone, let's say Barry or I or others who say, yes, we do model-based thinking, and we're also quite aware of what our models are describing and how they're being used, that to me is at least the level of awareness that says, okay, my model could be refined, it could be improved, I can learn, it may be missing a certain component, I may need to attach with some other model that's complementary. All of that is possible if one says, yes, I am doing model-based thinking. The danger here, I submit, is if one says, oh, I'm not doing model-based thinking, therefore I'm open. I submit that that is erroneous. We are all doing model-based thinking. Everyone here has a model of how they communicate, how the world works, how they understand interactions, how communication works. Everyone here has that. If you don't call it model-based reasoning, you could probably call it something else, words, habits, whatever it is. But if you're not aware that that's what you do, and you're not aware of how it could be controlling you, which it is, okay, and you're not consciously trying to evolve that and trying to learn and trying to improve, then that, to me, is the more erroneous and more static and more, let's say, stagnant mental behavior.
Right,
So
yeah.
it is not a criticism of model-based thinking to be doing model-based thinking. It is a criticism, in my belief, of not acknowledging that we all do it.
So it's kind of like those who say that they're not doing it is maybe like a self-deceit.
Yeah, that's
Can
spoken out of
happen,
ego also.
The argument,
You say that.
the argument for formalization of the model, I think, and
Yeah, that and the
use
identification.
you give it to somebody to implement that doesn't understand the details, and they're just trying to follow it. I think we're supposed to go 5 feet this way, and it's like, it doesn't work sometimes in some edge cases or whatever.
Let me say one more thing. That is not everybody's going to use these words, model-based thinking, okay? But a model basically is used to describe, to understand the dynamics, and to, in some sense, guide your interaction with what follows next, okay? Now, everybody's got that. Barry and I use the term model. Otherwise, some people use what? Theory of mind. Other people use, context, but it's fundamentally the same thing. So that was idea number one. I just have one other idea based on your notes that I wanted to contribute before I shut up this time around, okay? And that is, there's a sentence in your notes that says something like, we are not dealing with 1,000 distinct problems, but more like 1,000 variations on one theme. I don't know what that means, okay? So I would like to look at that, because to me, there are, at least a handful of different things that we're talking about. And I don't see that everything that we're talking about is just variations on one theme.
Okay, so that was in the beginning. So that's the collective action and coordination problem I think they're referring to there. That a great deal of our problems are variations on collective coordination and action.
Okay, so is that basically saying we're not collectively intelligent? That's one way of saying that. Because
yeah,
the flip side of that, which is, what about we as individuals? We as individuals still have responsibility. And that could be viewed separate from this whole collective intelligence issue. So I see those potentially as two separate, distinct areas.
Responsibility versus duty?
No, I'm saying there's the individual practice of intelligence and action, and then there's the collective intelligence.
Okay.
And those are two separate. And there's collective elements which you could argue don't apply to the individual. Therefore, it's under the individual's control how to observe, how to conclude, how to reason, how to act, how to decide, how to emote, how to communicate. All of that is still applicable, even if we don't have collective intelligence.
Yeah,
and the knowledge graph has many nodes.
And it's still
No
applicable if we have collective intelligence as well, of course.
But
then personal responsibility is in light of the larger collective.
Yes.
But I think the issue they're mentioning is collective coordination, collective action. This is a very difficult thing. But they're also saying that this should in principle be solvable because natural evolution has already solved it.
It's definitely solvable.
But it's not.
Are we the species that's going to solve it? It's definitely solvable.
Yeah, it should in principle be solvable. That's what they're saying. But humanity as one collective seems to be struggling with this. And so the positive thing they're saying is if we could solve this issue, then a whole range of other issues would be
Which, by the
solved.
way, goes back to Doug Engelbart and what he was concerned about when he was 25 years old.
Yeah. Okay, Barry.
Yeah, this is a good place to bring up Peter Senge from MIT, teaches management science. His term for systems thinking is the fifth discipline, and his book is called Fifth Discipline. And the main thing that he promotes is what he calls the learning organization. So when you have an organization, you can have a static organization like a bureaucracy that just does the same thing mechanically and doesn't evaluate its efficacy. Peter Senge says if you're going to be a community of systems thinkers, then you're going to be a learning organization that evaluates the efficacy of your practices and improves your practices incrementally, learns as it goes. And the thing is that collectively, you want to be a learning organization, as characterized by Peter Senge's analysis in his books and his presentations. And this is an important distinction between the concept of an organization that evolves in a constructive way, gets better over time, learns as it goes, versus a bureaucracy that's stuck in habits that are, quote, tried and true. They were introduced, decades or centuries or millennia ago, and then they're just used as if they're efficacious, and they become dysfunctional over time because the environment changes. And so the methods no longer produce the results that you predicted or advertised or anticipated. So this is really important. This absorbing this concept, Peter Senge's concept, systems theory, fifth discipline, learning organization, and making that a real living process, learning as you go.
Yeah. So how could that happen at a very large scale? I mean, that's also one of the big challenges.
Exactly.
Can I say?
Yeah, go for it. Yeah.
From what I was able to just determine, Senge published that in 1994. Okay.
I think it's about right. Yeah.
It was actually way after similar ideas have been espoused, particularly by TQM, the total quality movement,
method.
Even agile practices had already appeared by then.
Yeah.
So I think it's good. It's not as groundbreaking as it sounds because there are elements of learning and retrospectives and observing and improving practices that have already been in practice, by the time that book came out. Okay.
It was in practice 3,500 years ago.
Exactly. And if you also take a look at, just as a follow-up to one of my earlier themes, the quote unquote wisdom from the past, if you read these, there's usually laments in those books of wisdom that talk about the conditions of the times and talk about how men or women or society is deficient in some way. And therefore these books were written, partially in observance and in learning based on what was happening. I do want to push back, and I do want to push back, you could say it too harshly or too strongly, but, I think the time for wishy-washiness and, as Colin puts it, standing in the doorway is not sensitive to the sense of urgency.
Yeah.
There's a sense of urgency that says we should get our butt off the couch and really, start really figuring out what we need to do because time's a wasted. We got how many minutes until we're past the point of no return on climate change?
Yep.
And on a number of other issues. And in the meantime, we're tolerating alternate points of view, alternate facts, alternate bullshit.
Okay.
We're past that time.
But if
You just got cut off from the behavior police.
No, this is good. This is good because I think we have to try to figure this out actually, because You said earlier that one of the things that prevented people from being able to go outside of their model is their ego. And you mentioned this is maybe why we don't have real science today as a social.
I didn't say that, by the way. I think
No, but I think it's pretty obvious that we don't in any complete sense. Okay, so tell me then.
if we didn't have real science, how would we have come up with a vaccine?
Well,
also came up with politicians.
there's certainly some knowledge that develops.
Levels of manipulation, basically, good and bad.
But let me take an example. There's Sam Harris and Bret Weinstein. They've been on stage together several times. They have been good friends. They're both scientists. They're both PhDs. They're both public intellectuals. Now they have a very different opinion about this vaccine and COVID question. Why can't they get together on a Zoom call and have all the evidence, put all the evidence out, have a third moderator ask the questions, spend as many hours as they want, have people ask questions who follow it live, and actually figure it out? Why can't they do it?
We should.
Who are the
But they can't even get on the same stage. And they're
which two gods are you talking about?
Do they have an abhorrence of each other? I don't know their personal relationship.
Yeah, they were friends. And they were friends from before. But now they can't even go on a debate. So what's stopping it?
Wait. Is there one of them that's saying, yes, I will do this, and the other one saying, no, I will not do this?
Yeah, either it's that or both are saying no. And in the case of the show Rebel Wisdom, they wanted Bret Weinstein to come on. He did not want to come on. So what's going on here? If we don't figure this out, we can forget about solving these issues. We're not going to solve them if we can't even get public intellectuals able to just get on a stage together, share the evidence with an open mind, and change their mind according to the evidence in something as specific as whether there's a higher risk with the vaccine compared to COVID, compared to ivermectin. Like there's data here, right? There's actually data. It should be able.
I support your question.
So the point I'm getting to is all this really an issue of egos? Is all this really an issue of that we're so stuck in our own little subjective worlds, and that you have highly educated scientists, you have professors who are equally stuck, equally subjective, equally biased, equally unable to think critically. So it's all this, it all comes back to this issue then. So how do we solve it?
I don't actually know their situation, but Barry's had his hand up for a while.
Yeah, I want to point out why, this is a hypothesis of mine, personal hypothesis, why these two individuals decline to go into the venue that Glenn is describing. And the reason I think is because that venue, they get onto a Zoom session with the moderator and they spend 2 or 3 hours or multiple sessions. That model is known as the debate model of the argument culture. The debate model of the argument culture. And since the 90s, there's been a lot of observation that the debate model of the argument culture is a dysfunctional mechanism for resolving conflicts. You can reveal the conflict, but you don't resolve it in the debate model. Why? Because you're obliged to take one side or the other and defend it. And therefore you're not
You're a winner in a debate.
There's got to be a winner. So you're not So the alternative, for example, David Bohm says the alternative to the debate model is the Bohmian dialogue, where you're working towards common ground instead of taking a position and defending it.
Okay.
Our
People have
culture
known this.
loves the damn debate model. They
But
love
people
the
have,
argument culture.
yeah, people have known this for decades.
Right.
Both these individuals know this. Both these individuals have spoken about just what you said.
Right.
Why can't they get together and do this Bohemian dialogue with an open mind?
Values,
That's a good
values.
Invite
It's their
them.
values.
Offer to moderate. Do it.
Go for it, Stacy. Maybe you know.
The very first question I'd want to ask and know for certain is to go and ask Bret why he didn't choose to go on. We could find out he didn't choose to go on because there was a scheduling conflict. We could find out anything, but I'm just saying, we jump ahead. I haven't, so you shook your head that wasn't the reason.
Yeah,
So can you tell me more about what you know for fact?
I've heard him say a little bit, and I think he's very clear that he finds it very uncomfortable, the whole situation. That
So
he
you-
feels that it's a lot of hostility towards him personally. There's a lot of bad faith.
Okay.
There's all of that stuff.
So you've heard him acknowledge that it's true. He has declined to go on.
Well, he has said that he doesn't want to continue focusing on this. You know, but it's the question is why should, yeah, it's emotional reasons. Okay, that's the answer.
I understand that, but like, even if I were talking to you now and I said to you, I'm really hesitant to go on a Wednesday call because A, B, and C, that doesn't mean that somebody actually asked me to do it and I'm saying no. So that's why I'm just trying to, be really clear that he acknowledged he was offered and he said no, because that's very different of just speaking hypothetically about why you don't want to do something.
Yeah, it's just,
Barry's hand is up.
yeah,
Yeah,
go for it.
I'm in favor of the Bohmian dialogue model, which is another term for doing research as a show in front of a public audience. You can't, you can try to do research in the open and have an audience watching it, but it's like watching grass grow. I've done research my whole life professionally. Nobody wants to sit in my office and watch me do research. It's boring as sin, because it's like watching grass grow. Now, people will go and do that. I will collaborate with somebody and we will spend months on day after day, week after week, doing research to get to common ground. Who the hell wants to watch that? What they want is the answer. The process is boring as sin to watch.
Why should it be boring?
Because it's slow. It's slow and it's tedious. And it's
so is debate. So
Well,
is endless arguing between two sides that say the same thing over and over again. That's also very slow. And tedious.
Because it becomes boring because you said, I've seen this debate before.
Yeah.
And I don't want to see this debate again. I want to see progress.
More than once.
Go ahead, Sam.
Sam.
Or Susan.
Well, I see the characteristic that differentiates what you're talking about, Barry, versus debate. Is in debate, there's actually a very commonly understood structure. There's an opening statement, there's a rebuttal, there's questions, there's whatever, there's a wrap up. Okay, so things happen in a very time sequenced, predictable order. Whereas if you really two or more people leaning in to try and co-create and take their ideas and create something better, some of that will lead to dead ends if they're truly intellectually honest. Some of that will take some mulling time. Some of that will take some, scratching on a piece of paper or, getting into the shower or sitting on the toilet, for half an hour, It's not predictable from a time standpoint.
Right.
And that's what makes it difficult to watch. Now, if you take a camera crew and you shoot, these people for days or weeks, and then you edit out, those juicy parts, okay? Then you might be able to tell a story. But that requires also that the editor be intellectually honest, that they're not already trying to tell a different story.
Yeah.
And part of being intellectually honest is to actually examine the dead ends. You know, why did this not work? Oh, it didn't work this way, therefore, but it led me to ask this new question, which I didn't get before I had that previous dead end.
Right.
Those stories are not typically exciting for people to hear.
Bingo.
Right?
Right.
So it's not going to be captivating. It's not going to be, you know, Nielsen ratings attracting. It's not going to be, it's not even as attractive to watch as an idiot holding a Bible upside down, standing in front of it.
Look, why is it interesting then for me to listen to 3 or 4 hours of a scientist talk about complex molecular biology?
You're an outlier.
No, I'm not an outlier. They're getting lots of views. Take a look at Joe Rogan. He's the biggest podcaster in the world.
Yeah, no, he's not in the same category.
No, but he's having sometimes intellectuals on. He has researchers on his show.
No, he's a modern day Larry King.
Yeah, he's a personality.
But the point is, he has researchers on his show who go.
I'm sure he does.
Great
Did you see his program on Joe Rogan Explains Everything or Examines Everything or something?
That. I'm talking about he has experts.
He went after the UFOs. It was quite interesting.
He has experts on very narrow fields, and there's an enormous interest in it. People can watch it for hours and hours. Lex Friedman shows another example. I don't buy that people aren't interested in science. It's just not true. They are interested. The numbers show it. The view.
Joe makes it interesting. Joe does make it interesting.
So it is possible to make it interesting. So why shouldn't it be interesting to have two scientists who represent different points of view, but have an open mind and are capable? Because
I supported that, Glenn. I said
I don't believe that it's not interesting.
Invitation, well, it up, or anyone should do that.
So is the heart of the issues then that people actually aren't capable of having an open mind? That seems to be the heart of the issue. But that's the whole. It all comes back to this, doesn't it? Everything we've spoken about comes back to this, that people are attached to their existing view, and professors are no exception. People who have studied something their whole life and should be super smart seem to also be incredibly attached to their point of view.
It's the smart people, Glenn.
Emotionally reactive, and have the same issues as all the idiots that they love to criticize.
Here's the deal. You're in the mind space right now that I think I'm in most of the time in this group, what you're in right now. And I feel it between Sam and Doug, and I wanted to map out point by point, why can't these two seemingly sensible gentlemen have a discussion about the word agreement so that we can actually put the term into the glossary and move on? You know, how difficult is that? Apparently, it's next to impossible. Although maybe it's already been done, but who knows? But we sure as hell aren't going through it in a methodical way that you're talking about. And that's why I suggest the map there, where I would be a trusted moderator between Doug and Sam to let them tell me what it is they're trying to say so I can capture it. So I'd just be running around with buckets of knowledge trying to stick it in the place where they want it on the wall, not where I think it goes, right? Because you got an infinite canvas when it comes to making context. And these guys can really draw out some boundaries. But Doug doesn't like my boundary questions because he doesn't see it that way. I don't know. I have a really hard time. So if we're not willing to take the topic seriously enough to actually examine it in the way that you suggest, Glenn, then you're just going to be getting, we could talk about it later. Which is kind of this space. It's more of a town square. I think that we could organize more in-depth things. And, I hear Stacy's call to relook at the beginning of this video today as a good example of a bunch of people having a different standpoint right off the bat, right? And Stacy went around thinking for a whole long time I was trying to insult Barry with the Clue Train when he was just cooling off in the basement playing with the Cool Train. That was something that, you know, he shared as quite an important piece of history, the Clue Train. It wasn't me saying, oh, he doesn't have a clue on the train. But, you know, Stacy goes around, that Colin, you should hear what he says about Barry. It's awful. It's just awful.
Is that what
So-
Stacy did? Do I know this?
Who fucking knows what people do, right? But the point is, how do we clear it up if we're sincere, right?
How do we clear it up? We go to the text, which is what I will do after this call.
The text isn't there. It was 2 weeks ago. Doug didn't post it. Barry doesn't
Oh,
remember it the way I remembered it. Is it important? Is it important?
Well,
Let's
since
focus.
you just mischaracterized me, and since I'm
I don't know.
gay,
I have
for
no
me, it's
idea. I have no idea. But I do know that when you said that I was insulting
Stacey,
Barry, and that's the way you
Stacey.
took it, that really wasn't what I was doing. And
And I'm going to just say.
and I don't
calling
tell
BS.
people what their impression is of me, but I can correct something that I think are misimpressions. Like I see Sam doing it. He'll say, look, I could be wrong. If anybody would please, you know, I think it was about misogyny one time with your daughter, and you made a comment, and you wanted to double check yourself with the group here if it was actually out of bounds. Anyway, you know, we can do that. And that's what Glenn's asking. Why don't we do that if it's important? So where's the important list? And standing in the doorway for the woo is great because there's so much woo. There's probably more woo than there's things we know. I don't know. But the thing is, I can't
I don't even know
relate it
what
to
you mean when you say standing in the doorway with
it means
woo.
okay, it was an analogy at the very beginning where you're kind of waiting for something to happen and you don't know if it's going to happen, so you stand there with an empty bag waiting in the doorway for someone, you know, trick or treat. I don't know what the hell you're doing in the doorway, but you're waiting for something.
Waiting for
but
something.
but the doorway is actually almost too much information for the situation, because, you know, standing somewhere waiting for something might be a better explanation. So then I say, okay, well, where are you standing and what are you waiting for? And if they can start to fill in this mental model and put some context to it, then we can remember it. Say, you know what, you had a great idea the other day. I'd like to add to that. But if they're just saying wishy-washy things that don't relate to anything that we can understand, we can't relate it to anything that we know of. You know, the Feynman, you know, explanation of how do you know things, we relate them to things that we already know about. So if we can't have a model of something we can relate it to, then, and I don't know why people think the earth is flat. I just don't know, Glenn, but there's even a better one. Like, come on, people are out there and they are batshit crazy for some reason. I don't know.
That does seem to be the case. Yeah, Sam.
Stacey, I know you're up, but I want to say something about you, okay? That is that you and Colin were both trying to make a point. I think Colin and you were both trying to speak at the same time. And what I heard was your voice, for whatever reason, was drowned out by Colin's voice.
No surprise there.
I'm sensitive to that because we have few enough women as it is.
She could speak now all she wants. Go ahead.
But she couldn't speak when she was trying to speak because you both were trying to talk at the same time. I don't know who interrupted.
That wasn't because she was a woman. I assure you that.
No, it's because you're Colin.
That I believe, Colin.
Okay. So anyway, I'm just observing that because it's on the record, and I don't, like I said, I don't know who interrupted whom. I just know that in that little altercation, Colin's voice was more prevalent and louder and continued. Okay, where I think Stacey eventually dropped out. Okay.
Yeah.
More
That's not the main thing I
consistently
wanted to say.
droning consistently on.
Yeah. I think she was coming. She was counter one of the points I made. It was a ping pong.
But anyway,
what it
Stacey,
was.
I think
Okay.
Yeah.
Is that I know it's
all
the top of
yours.
the hour, and I wanted to personally check out. Glenn, thank you very much for bringing a topic and moderating. I also want to make this one caveat, which is my reactions are primarily to your notes, not primarily to the video. So if anybody's watching this video and trying to take what I say and say it applies to the video, I would say be careful about that, because I was essentially trying to react to Glenn's notes because I watched the first probable hour of it, but I didn't, complete the entire thing. I mean, I've had it playing many, different reels. Okay. But it's so long that I end up, having to stop it, do something else, come back, whatever. So it's been very hard to listen to the entire thing, be careful, as Glenn was, in taking accurate notes and then putting it all in correct context. So I just want to make that one caveat before I leave. Okay. And also next weekend, I believe is an open weekend. So we could either do me or somebody else. But then the following weekend, I believe, is the 18th, which I think is Kayla's weekend. And Kayla, if you're still here, I think you confirmed with me yesterday, but I just want to state that and announce that for the rest of the group. Okay? Thank you.
Yeah, Stacy.
Yeah, so thanks, Sam, for that. And I have decided to back off because it's not worth the argument. But I did want to say that I was wondering how many people actually watched the video that I had posted that had Nora and John. How many people watched that? Because I thought that was a good example that did not turn into a debate. I saw some movement. I would love to discuss that at a later time. But and Glenn, I just also want to say, I once, this whole idea of what doesn't sell. I once pitched an idea, and it had to do with a show that would take, Fox News and MSNBC and be its own show of, having reasonable minds talk about it. And my friend brought it to their friend who is a TV executive, and the answer was nobody would ever watch. And I strongly disagree, because I think everybody here, we would be watching. We would be interested in having our minds opened. And I think people enjoy the process of thinking when it's not done in a confrontational way. So with that,
Of course they do. Otherwise, why would the podcast have become so popular? I mean, hour-long podcasts.
I agree.
How do you keep it interesting?
Yeah,
Really the trick.
I think you keep it interesting if you have a good dialogue, if you have people have interesting things to say.
I was really struck earlier, and I didn't want to break Barry's flow, but when he was talking about it's too boring, but if he got together with a colleague, they would enjoy each other's company in that endeavor, because they appreciate, and they most importantly, understand to some degree what's going on, so they can see the story and the nuance in what's happening. It's not just the clock ticking and waiting for daddy to finish with his papers on the table. It's actually, they actually know what's going on, so they're part of that thing, and it's a high bar for people to think science. And I think Stacy's right in a post or something she said about maybe it was just the opening today, about education being important, and triggers about places where there's free education, people comparing the war in Iraq to wiping off student debt, and Australia, they have highly subsidized education, I believe, in other places as well. So I don't know. But with the idea of finding people who are interested and understand what it is you're doing. Like I posted on Keldon's post there this morning, and he mentioned to me that, I block people who don't understand code when I talk in code. So I apologize for that. And he said, no apology necessary. So then I come up with a statement that wasn't code. And it was just naturally, and followed along with the conversation about, the magic search box, I think is what it is. And that's a theme, I think, from a long time ago in the Kelvin community, the magic search box, because he promotes that with searching his site. And it's a way that I can talk about exactly what I was talking about, which was Vue and React or an envelope, I think was my comment. Vue and React are front-end frameworks for developing software, right? And an envelope, well, nobody knows how that relates to what I just said if they don't have code, right? They don't know code. So it's a way to deliver and interact with somebody with information. So, right, I'm at the crossroads of possibilities was what I was commenting on. But he said, nobody's going to understand that. So in the end, the comment really was the magic search box, because that's what Sam's asking for. Colin, when are you going to finish that magic search box? So, that's the point. So there is a way to keep it interesting.
By the way, Colin, will
Between people who understand what's going on, it's more of a skill, as Barry has pointed out many a time, as he's asked for, he would like some assistance in taking his technical stories and making them more story bound. I think he works with other people to try to achieve that. So, it's laudable, and there's a great call for people who have linguistic abilities and also understand science. I think that's a very important role, because that is kind of the bridge that people need to understand what Weinstein and Schmachtenberger are actually talking about in the first place, right? But actually they do speak quite simply, but every once in a while they throw in a word like steel man or, first, second, third, type of.
Yeah, first person, second person, third person, epistemics.
Yeah, different. So, epistemics. Yeah, and I think we commented on that. And by the way, Sam, could you make it so Glenn could edit the word Schmachtenberger on the titles of those posts, because we were searching for him, we couldn't find him, because apparently he must have, when he made the topic, he must have hit the keyboard or whatever, and it didn't spell the word Schmachtenberger. It's a hard word, but it's got a lot of. But it's in Zulip, it's not spelt right. So when I'm going through searching for it, I couldn't find it. There's another reason why we should have an appeals for edits. But yeah.
So by the way,
so that's a whole handbag of stuff. Take it, do what you want.
Yeah, I mean, I've been playing around with Obsidian. They have this graph where you can see your brains. Not the brain, but the notes as a sort of brain, and you can link between. So there's a lot of tools. Yeah, Barry, did you?
I just wanted to point out that scientists and academics are not immune from falling into the trap of engaging in the debate model of the argument culture, and then just it never resolves. And Max Planck, famous scientist Max Planck, made an observation about that. His observation is science advances one funeral at a time. Those debates can go on until somebody dies. That happened in the case of Joseph Priestley and Antoine Lavoisier on the discovery of oxygen and the development of the model of what's the word I'm looking for? Forgot the word, the combustion model. Priestley gets half the credit for discovering the element oxygen along with Lavoisier, but Lavoisier stuck to the outmoded phlogiston theory of heat, and Lavoisier got the model that survived, but they disagreed until they died. Science advances one funeral at a time. Who wants to listen to them argue that until their dying day?
Yeah, I'm kind of wondering where this science is. I mean, I hear a lot of people speak about it. This pure practice of reasoning and questioning one's own assumptions. And, it seems to be incredibly difficult to do it.
Yeah.
Yeah, Alex. So. Want to say something?
We're living in the age of high-tech information, and science is boggling people's minds with the amount of research that's coming available. The stuff you can find online is mind-blowing. But the other point I want to make is that if we have to achieve something, we really do need to follow a path that has been tried and tested in the past. It's got rules. There's a resolution process for disputes, so that they don't hold up or drag us behind with their complexity and rabbit holes. Simple set of rules. If you don't like rules, okay, call them guidelines. That they're worth adopting to people who are serious and genuine and willing to make an effort. that want to see us make progress, that want to see us focusing on the objective we came here for. That's all.
To me, that is agreeable context.
That would be the fair conversation.
Well, you could have a
protocols
fair
and,
conversation if you do have the ability to come to an agreement within a context. That's what I'm saying. When Barry was talking about the two scientists, there was probably lots of places they agreed, but there was some point where there was a context that they agreed to disagree. Now, I don't know what the details were and how they would prove the other might be wrong.
They didn't. They just, one of them died. Well, they both eventually died.
So they were so were they both right?
No, the phlogiston theory was eventually thrown out, but Joseph Priestley believed in it to his dying day and argued against Lavoisier's improved model, the oxidation model.
Right. So I see two things here. One is the statement that science supersedes and transcends the man's emotion. That's one. Science is the science is going to win out whether he dies or not. If he lived forever, they probably figured it out. Yeah. And the other thing is that more importantly to our conversation is the conflict, right? Like him giving up his standpoint, what would convince him, right? So
I would convince him.
Right. So that's kind of the thing Glenn's saying. Why do these two men, like there's two highly educated scientists talking about a molecule of all things. There's not even a world of A and B to consider and possibilities and everything. It's right down to the nitty-gritty there.
They
and they're
discovered
still,
oxygen, but they didn't know how it worked.
yeah. So it's still quite wide open, mind you, because, physics is infinite the other way too, I suppose, but near infinite, whatever. So this is the thing. And I really like the quote where I sent it in the chat a couple of times that they said in the Sapiens book that ever since the cognitive revolution, there has been no one way for a man to exist, but a plethora or a whole smorgasbord of possibilities, right? So all those possibilities. So that's you. And Neil Davidson had a good demonstration one time about how things expand and then contract and then expand and contract in waves. It seems to be knowledge does follow that way, or the iterative thing, or going around Barry's emotional circle of learning, the effective learning stuff. Like this is all relates back to, is Nora Bateson going to say, this isn't the stage theory I'm talking about? Like Doug's going to say, oh, that's not the out of bounds stuff that I'm talking about. Like, how do you know? Right. So you really have to get down to defining things and have a good skill at it. And I think the best way to go about it is to first declare that it's important, declare that, we don't have enough time to solve it right now, which is what they did in that pseudo debate. Right. They said, we'll try to skim it, but we can't solve it. And then plan on coming back and following through in a way that actually advances it, as opposed to just repeating the same thing. And that's why I proposed the map that's made in common. Not one person builds the map and says, I know the way. But we have to learn to map it together. And if Sam says it's in a Word document, then if it's important, we should spend a week to say how we're going to put the stuff in this Word document without over-engineering it, just to make sure we don't miss anything and nobody is blocked or unheard. That's what I'm concerned about. If we pick up a tool, are we blocking somebody from being able to participate? And even if we were, you could, for the amount of time we spend in this group, we could facilitate and transcribe what the person says into the tool for them, So I don't know what we're actually trying to achieve beating around the bush, but this Schmachtenberger thing, and we've talked about this, Glenn, I think this is an important growth in the group to try to tackle something like this and do a retrospective. I feel as some feedback, we could have actually watched a couple of clips because it's so much more powerful, right? And then we could have talked about a point at a time, and then you could have kept Sam from going down his litany of the clip that I'm going to take that's going to prove that he hates Schmachtenberger with everything. So there's ways to go about it, and I really appreciate what you've done and bringing this forward. I was hoping it would be sooner than later. I'm hoping we continue it even next week in a, like I say, a 20
Yeah.
minute a 20-minute segment. So if we played like a clip and then went around and mapped out what we all think about it, took a half an hour and then moved on to the next thing. You know, we could highlight sense-making segment in the barn raising. Otherwise, we're going to have to set up side time to do it, where a select group of people who are interested in it, like maybe you, me, and Sam, would go off in a triad and work on it, because the rest of the group really doesn't want to participate. They just want to see the results or whatever. So it's how important it is. I think it's foundational. And I'll just say one more thing. I noticed on Trello that there is a board where Sam has it, and I believe it's empty except for the tags, or the cards are there as placeholders for the pillars.
Yeah,
Right.
that's right. That's one of the.
So I
One
think
of
that
the
we
boards.
should ease into laying out our agreements and disagreements, listening to our mentors who have thought about this a lot, like Schmachtenberger and company. Maybe the
course.
Consilience project is something that we actually want to adopt, except for point 5, 6, and 8. Right? Maybe we
Yeah,
need a little
maybe.
structure. Yeah. Or maybe we could say we're supporters and in spirit of the Consilience project. You know, like, how do you do that? How do you join our groups together? Because that's what we're talking about, scale, right? And I think if Alex said when he listened to that video, he said he thought it was bang on, like most of it was really run true to him. Same thing for me, same thing for you.
Yeah.
Apparently, I wanted to ask Sam if it felt like they were just preaching to the choir, and until they said something that didn't really ring true to him, then he wanted to clarify that. That's a lot of times the way I'm thinking. Most of the time I'm going along, Jordan Peterson's talking great, love it, love it, love it, love it, and then boom, he extrapolates somewhere where I go, I don't know about that, right? And those are the moments in our own group I'd like to catch. If we could all be watching a video, yeah, I like that. I like what Heiner's saying. I like what Heiner's saying. That's great, great. Wait now, right there. I don't like it. Are you taking off, Alex?
Okay. Yeah. Good night
You want
there.
to check? You want to check out? Do you already check out?
I'm falling asleep and drifting off, so I'm gonna have a bit of shut eye. See you later.
Okay.
Have a good one, Alex.
Yeah. I'll also be going soon. But yeah, I think we'll be good to continue next week with some of this. Maybe I should watch the rest of that Laura Bateson video, because the beginning was really good. So, but anyway, I'm just gonna shut off now. But am I the host now? I guess then the room will end. So I don't know. I can't hear you, Colin. You're muted.
Sorry, there's Sam, Josh, Stacy, Barry, Glenn.
You're the host. Glenn is the host.
Okay. So if anyone
Barry's
wants
the co-host.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, that's right. Barry's the co-host. Josh is here. Do you want to say anything?
Oh, baby. They grow so fast.
I was going to say, she already fell asleep during the conversation and she just woke up.
Yeah.
So she's listening. I'm listening. We're here. And
Yeah.
Giselle's here.
Morning.
Hello. She already looks bigger than last time.
Oh, yes, she is.
She grows fast. So,
Yep, we're here.
Wonderful. Beautiful. It grows so fast.
Yep. I told her to stop growing. She won't listen to me.
No, and then her grandma's told her, hurry up, go faster.
Well,
But she took in everything. She literally fell asleep listening.
Yeah.
I was like, is this boring you? And she's like, no, it's great.
That's actually a good sign. That's a good sign, Josh. That's peaceful conversation.
Yep. It is a good sign.
Soothing voices.
Yeah.
You know?
It's a really good sign.
Soothing voices. You know, Alex G, he had a great expression about the GCC. The people who love the sound of our own voices.
It isn't that for me, but I bet you others would argue.
That was the other Alex Levine and Jan said that.
Yeah,
My
yeah,
mic, I
yeah,
think, is
that's
too
right.
hot.
The Alex, yeah,
Levine.
Lavignon, yeah, that's right.
Not
I
this,
thought-
the other Alex.
no, yeah, not Alex Reed. It was G for Gagnon. Yeah, yeah, I thought that was good. We love the sound of our own voices. So it's a kind of a good definition.
Yeah, it's accurate.
But anyway, I'm going away. But am I ending the room now? I think
Yes.
it might.
Well,
Okay.
Glenn, keep up the fight with integrating Schmachtenberger's principles into the group. Support it.
Yeah, well, you know, the notes are out there, so
Where they
you
fit,
know,
where they fit, we can adopt stuff. I don't know why we don't.
yeah, we touched upon.
Hey, what has
some
the
of it today.
Consilience Project done to actually adopt anything? We should look at their guidelines and rules.
They put out a lot of articles, long articles. That's what I know.
No, that's the E.O. Wilson term of art, consilience. That's his book.
Okay.
Edward O. Wilson. He wrote the book. He didn't make up the word. The word goes back to the Enlightenment.
Yeah.
He resurrected the word from the Enlightenment literature. Consilience.
Yeah, that's right. I'm not exactly sure what it means.
I think it means pretty much the same thing as Nora Bates' made up word is sympathezy. You know this
Yep.
word that she made up, sympathy. I think consilience and sympathezy are very much overlapping concepts, learning together.
Yeah, here I found it. The linking together of principles from different disciplines, especially when forming a comprehensive theory. So, you know, it's a collective intelligence experiments, and there might be some, you know, learning that's happening that you just can't measure just from working on the stuff.
It's learning together instead of arguing against.
Yeah. And
exactly.
I think that the actual argument is only when people want to get their tail up in the air to take a stance or make a claim or defend a claim. Like when you're curious and you don't know, you just shrug your shoulders and say, we'll see, right?
This is why I point out that conversation and adversation are different kinds of utterances. Conversation is conversing together. Adversation is arguing against, speaking against. And I love conversation. I can't stand adversation. It drives me up the wall.
Yeah, and I think adversation is, I would think 92.150% driven by identity. So
probably ego, I'm sure, is in there.
Yeah. So you're not arguing against facts. You're arguing against how somebody fits into the world.
Yeah.
How comfortable they are with the puzzle piece they've.
See, I'm right, you're wrong story, and that's boring after the first 2 minutes.
And you know, I think the numbers show it. You know, people are more interested in conversation than adversation. You know.
And if you had a fair conversation tool, two people got together, and just like you get filtered out from a conversation with a dictionary, if you don't know how to look up a word, you get filtered out of a conversation with the little assistant devices. If you don't know how to form a sentence it can understand, right? You can yell at it all you want, it'll just say, should I call 911? Actually, I don't know that. That's a good experiment. I have a few experiments I've tried with it's fun. Like, for example, one, if you say that it's scary, it'll say, let's talk about something else.
Saturday Night Live did a famous send-up of adversation with Dan Aykroyd and Jane Curtin, where they were doing a send-up of these debate model thing, conservatives versus liberals. And the famous line from Dan Aykroyd was, "Jane, you ignorant slut."
Yeah, I remember that. That means he wins, right?
Well, I mean, and it got the biggest laugh, I think, in all of Saturday Night Live's history.
Now I take a little bit of umbrance. That's probably too strong of a word.
Umbrage.
I take a little. That's even stronger. So, but when Sam called me out of over talking Stacy, yeah, I think that's the kind of conversation we have sometimes, and it would be better if it didn't happen. But wouldn't it be nice if we could unravel that emotion a little bit and just like sort of separate it from colliding, like on put a little bit of a gap in there, so that
you weren't speaking so loudly, but you were sort of steadily droning on.
well, there is some things I was saying about that Stacy wanted to conclude when I'm saying like, and it's important, there you are, Stacy, with the woo, it's not that I disagree with what she's saying. I can only hold on to the conversation for as long as I can have a place for it. And if it's in design mode and art mode, that space is pretty big. When it comes to trying to do sense making in a non-artistic way, in a very scientific way, then the constraints close quite a bit to what you can entertain for very long. Entertain everything, but for how long? And I think that was the point Sam was trying to make as well. And maybe a debate as well as another way people say, try to do it too quickly. If you have a debate, you can find the difference really quick, but it's not the best way to solve the conflict, as Barry says. So maybe, there's better ways to find out what the conflict is, and then better ways to move the piece forward so that both people appreciate that they are trying to have a conversation and not an adversation. So identity feeling somebody's blocking me out from allowing me to think these things. So, and I get that from you too, Glenn. You say to me, well, you're not giving the possibility for something and something. And I'm saying, well, it's not about the possibility. It's about how much in the thing that you are actually claiming do you want to be confident in? And how are you going to show me what it is you're talking about? Right. So that's the thing.
The only thing
the burden of proof, right?
Well, the only thing I can say is that, sometimes I like to sit quietly, sometimes alone, other times with other people, and stuff happens that you can't explain. And some call it spirituality or spiritual practice or meditation or experiences.
Experiences is what Sam calls them.
Certain kinds of, but it's not just normal experiences, but there's certain things that you can experience, which if you were to try to translate it into words, then you would distort it.
It's the conclusions you might make that are
Yeah, that's another issue, right? If you add conclusions to it. Yeah. Sam, you're back.
Notice that when Colin was talking about Stacy came on and I think wanted to respond, but she was not given an opportunity to respond.
She's got all the opportunity in the world. Maybe she had to go get a pot or something.
And that you guys kept talking.
Well, unless we have timers, we can't really make that claim.
Did you
go ahead, Stacy?
Did you want to say something, Stacy? I got the impression you wouldn't.
Wait. She's back.
Yeah.
Yes, I actually raised my hand, but I had the frying pan on, but I just turned that off. So I do want to say something because I want to point out, and Colin, you can go back and look at this. You actually did something that created that. And what you did, and you can go back in the text and find it, you made a statement, to the best I can remember it was, and Stacy went around telling everyone I'm something about Barry.
That was a lie. That was a skit playing.
Colin,
that was skit playing.
He's right, but that's good. Like he said, it was a lie. And that's what prompted me to jump in, because I'm not gonna wanna let a lie go unchallenged. But then I finally dropped off because I was like, this isn't worth it.
Yeah, no.
Anybody could judge. They could either trust that Colin was talking shit.
Yeah. I was making a drama of how stuff could get out of control. Not that Stacy did that, but Stacy could have went and told all these people. And I might have said Stacy could have went and told all these people.
But I actually was just the opposite. I actually go out of my way to do things in as quiet a manner as possible. That's
respectable.
Quietly. Yes.
That's respectable. No, that's respectable. And I appreciate that, Stacy. But at the same time, you did take me the wrong way. And that was the point. And how much
Colin, you brought that to the public realm. You had
I think you have a few times. Yeah, I stand in the public as standing against that. We have had several public conversations.
Stacy.
I know you are, but what am I? I know you are, but what am I? I know you are, but
what's going on? What's going on? Sorry, my mic seems very hot. But what's going on is that I am not disagreeing with Stacy. I'm saying I don't understand. And we get into a conversation where that never.
And I'm interrupting you, Colin, is that when Stacy's trying to make a statement, you don't let her finish. You keep interrupting.
I'm sorry about that, but I figure we're just talking in a friendly manner as ping-ponging, and I hope that she does get what she wants to say.
I'm interrupting you again.
Go ahead. Like, this is not
I've
interrupting
heard
to
this
me.
dynamic here before.
This
few times as well.
it's interrupting to me if I'm blocking you. I don't want to block you, and so that's the intention. I don't want to block Stacy either.
I'm only doing this because I know that a number of women do not participate because they feel that this area is not safe. So if we continue to exhibit behavior that is not safe for conversation, I think women are going to leave and not stay. I'm just trying to point out where it is that we're doing things that may be against being welcoming.
Maybe we need different forms for different conversations, because I think that's not just a effect of our group, but I think that's pretty much worldwide when people are discussing things at a level of detail like Barry was talking about that gets boring.
Whoa.
And adversarial.
Your misogynistic statement, it sounds to me.
No, I think it's true. I think there is different areas of interest, and you'll find that and there was an example of a counterculture that where girls were getting into gaming, the whole gaming girl culture. Anyway, Stacy's back. That to me is like her raising her hand. I don't want to block Stacy. Go ahead.
No, I don't want special treatment because.
No, this is the after show. It's ping pong. You chew and come back,
Well,
get your
that's it.
pot,
I'm
whatever.
just chewing, which is why my camera's off. But I just want to say that I have an extremely high tolerance, and that's why I come back. But most people would have been gone.
Yeah.
I can relate to that feeling.
And
I'm
challenge
gonna
to be
just listen
short
to
and
that.
concise as well as a challenge, right? If we can't be a little concise, then it's.
But I really want to be fair.
interruptions.
I really want to be
You
fair.
want to be fair, you know.
I'm not fucking around with saying, oh, Stacy, you're just crazy, or, you know, Tease, you're crazy, or Glenn, you're crazy. It's like, in that idea you just mentioned, I can't build a mental model that I can actually sit here and wait until something happens. And that's another thing. I don't mind to bring things up again, but if there's no progress, and that's kind of the idea of the Trello board. And what I'm trying to do with Alex in the chat, I'm trying to, you know, get him to say, is there some things that we could put on the Trello board that would help your project? And he's saying, nope, there isn't. It's all done. You don't understand. All he needs SEO. So apparently his project's finished, right? And I was hoping we do a little Trello with Schmachtenberger and maybe show some clips. So if we can all feed into what we think we could do to make it more feature rich, that's what I'm hoping for. I know you got to go, Glenn, and I don't want to.
I just made Sam Holster. If you guys want to talk a little more, I gotta go. But anyway,
No,
yeah.
I think we're moving forward. I appreciate what you're doing, Glenn.
Yeah, good discussion. Bye bye.
There's Josh. Welcome back. Can't hear
Thank you, Colin. Thank you.
Yes,
Are
yes.
you guys all talked out? Are we done, or what are we doing?
I think we're pretty well done. Yeah. It was very interesting. I could see many ways to go with that. What do you think about a way to discuss the Schmachtenberger stuff, and if it applies to the GCC core? And do you think following Trello with Sam's pillars would be valuable?
I think Barry kind of nailed it when he said that, you know, that the format itself with two people, like who can analyze and make sense of it better, isn't a solution. It isn't systems thinking. I don't even think it holds place, for me at least, in the GCC type of conversation, because it's more of a, I have a better grasp on reality. And then the other person says, but do you? Because I don't think you're grasping this. And they go, well, okay, that's a good point, but you're not grasping this. And then they're just talking about what they don't know as opposed to what they do know. And when they get into the things that they do know, they have to, because of the dialogue aspect of a one-on-one conversation, counteract to keep the conversation moving, as opposed to diving into the things that we know. Like right now, we're having I don't know, what is this, a quadrilogue? How many Stacy's here, Sam? I spent the first year here at JCC having side conversations that were dialogues, trilogues, quadrilogues, and pentalogues. And it was very different every time. When I was just talking to Aaron Perlmutter, and then Alona, I'm trying to remember her name, the Russian lady would show, she's the one that invited me to GCC. She'd show up in the conversation, then she'd grab a scientist from somewhere and pull them into a quaternary conversation. And then it ended up being like a debate between her and the scientist, and me and Aaron were just listening. Whereas before we were having a conversation. So I don't mean to go into a diatribe about what conversation is, but was it Brent or Eric Weinstein and Schmachtenberger? I wasn't quite sure. I was pretty sure he said Brent Weinstein
Brent.
is the Brent. Okay. I don't know which conversation he's referring to, because I did watch an epic Eric and Schmachtenberger conversation, but was that a recent one that we were talking about today? Does anybody know?
I think it was
Like
a
when-
recent one. I think it was
It's
recent.
February.
Oh, okay. So somewhat recent, but not
No.
with all the information we have in
Well,
September.
actually, it is quite recent, because when it came out in February, that's when Glenn started taking notes, and we started to talk about how we'd like to bring that to GCC. We've been talking for months about having today's meeting, and it just kind of, it fell on the barn. You're like, open up a bag of potatoes.
Hi,
Anyway,
Barry.
Because monologue means one person speaking, a lot of people think that dialogue means two. It doesn't. It means through words. It doesn't mean two
Can you explain
people.
that? What do you
Yeah, I used to think the same. I used to think the dialogue was two people. And then a friend of mine who's quite literate in etymology said, no, the dia in dialogue doesn't mean two. It means through. You're communicating through the medium of words. And so three people, four,
Yeah.
doesn't matter. That's all dialogue.
does that relate
Okay,
to
that makes
diaphragm?
sense.
Diaphragm
That-
is a boundary.
So I'm using the wrong terminology of one person, two people, three people,
Right.
in terms of the written language and Shakespeare and playwrights and dialogue. If it's dialogue, there's four people.
There can be as many as
But-
you like on a stage.
So what do you call a conversation with two people? Of course, that falls under the etymology of dialogue, but what would
Yeah,
you
I don't know.
call?
I'm not sure if it has its own name or not. I'd have to look it up, but I know that dialogue does not mean two. It
Well,
just-
hold on. I'm on the etymology online now. I don't know how much we trust that. Circa 1200 or C 1200. That's what year would that be? C 1200. That's the common century. So it's
circa amount approximately.
okay. Literary work consisting of a conversation between two or more persons.
Right.
From
two
the
or
old
more.
French dialogue, a direct from Latin dialogues, from Greek dialogue, conversation, dialogue related to dialogsthesia, converse, from dia, across, between.
Right. Cross between, through, among. It's
Yep.
just multi-party as opposed to monologue.
So it kind of means the whole thing, but it's a multi-layered thought.
Right.
Do you mind if
Yeah.
we break that down, Colin? Is that something that, because I think Barry's bringing up a good point, is it's a through way. And then just
Well-
even the word converse
Yeah.
has a very specific meaning. Con
With,
and a verse.
yeah, words.
Like if you're reading a verse out of the Bible, it's a verse.
with words. We're talking body language, mister.
I'm just saying a lot of this is really important because we don't think about these things and then we start a conversation or whatever. And I came to the GCC to try to learn better forming conversations that weren't just with like, I'm used to one-on-one. I'm used to just one person. I listen to what they think. I try to understand the best I can. And then they say, well, what do you think? And then they listen to what I think. And then at the end, we both go, well, nice talking with you. And then sometimes we just like, it's a real art form to both talk and to listen. I just think just separating it into a dyad of two things, that's hard enough, let alone start to try to take notes and sense making and all the other come out of the thinking process. You know, when someone says something that's, oh, wow, that's a really interesting thing you said. How can I research that more? Like, let's dive deeper into that. Do we dive deeper now or later? Do I take note? Like how I think that other thing, I'm just spitballing, I'm thinking off the top of my head, is I've been talking with Cusella lately about our viewpoints of past, present, and future. And I'll say something and she thinks I'm talking about right at that moment. And I'm not signifying and being clear that I mean some point in the future.
Filtering. Yeah, we're always filtering.
but-
That's a good question.
And we're also always temporally figuring out where we lie in our own brains in space and time.
Filtering context, yeah.
But not just filtering, Colin. I mean, like literally,
I think
like
filtering is what, as Sam was saying, it's almost invisible. It's just happening.
and can we make it conscious? Is that what
We
science
can,
is?
we can.
Is-
That's what Glenn was asking for. Can we filter together without, you know, because did you get the part where Glenn was quite upset with Bret and Daniel having, I didn't even know they were having difficulty speaking. Maybe it wasn't even the two that he's talking about. I missed it. Who was it? Do you remember, Barry, who was having the conflict?
I don't remember. It's been so long since I've watched that video. I watched it months ago. I did not watch it last week.
No, I don't think they had the conflict there in that video, but maybe that's what Glenn meant.
I don't think so. Did he mention Sam Harris maybe?
Yeah,
Maybe.
Sam Harris and Bret Weinstein
Yes.
declined to have a debate because they
Right.
didn't, they had sort of grown out of that debate
That's right.
argument model and says this is not a constructive way to do this.
My world makes sense again. Thank you.
Has anybody seen the debate with Richard Dawkins and Bret Weinstein?
Yeah.
That was interesting.
I think so. I see a lot of Richard. I'm a Richard fan.
Yeah, I'm quite the fan of Bret Weinstein, meaning I saw him first on Joe Rogan talking about what happened at, I think it was something state college, Green State or somewhere in Oregon where he was teaching. And the way he rose to popularity is his students started telling him that he's wrong about his views on reality. And they got into it to the point where the students kicked him out of the school. It's a very liberal
Yeah.
college, and it's so liberal that they started a movement against him and his wife and got them expelled from their own school.
Yeah, the rise of the social warrior, justice
Gatekeeping.
warrior.
The gatekeeping phenomenon.
Yeah, it was gatekeeping too. Yeah, it was mob gone mad.
And calling
type
him a
of religion.
racist, you know, that's how they got him kicked out, is they called him a racist.
Yeah.
But that
It's just
to
it-
me is this sort of rabbit hole that we're going down with the Sam Harrises of the world and the Jordan Petersons and the Schmachtenbergers and his brother Eric, and this whole sense-making rabbit hole of when the world turns into nonsense and nonsense gains power.
Yeah. Stacey,
Well, in a fair, go ahead, Barry. Say
Barry.
again, I
Stacey's
overtalked you.
very contemplative here.
Oh, contemplative.
Well, yeah, I'm hesitant if I'm going to say this.
Please don't be, because I think you usually make the most sense of all, Stacey. So I appreciate when
Thank you.
your logic is usually, even if it's not right on, you'll say that it's not right on.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. As long as you're
But
willing,
you have
we're all
good
willing to be
logic.
open.
Well,
Go ahead, be
thank you.
wrong.
This is a
You're
little
right.
bit difficult to say though, but I will. I think part of the challenge that we have is the way we allow influence to be concentrated. And so as an example, I think I guided Colin towards the dark horse about 2 years ago. As far as, Daniel Schmachtenberger, when I listen to him, I totally resonate with him. But I want to take away the word mentor. And I want to say that the reason I was drawn to him is because he was saying what I was thinking. I didn't get my thinking from him. I found myself in the same place. And so to go to the next step, I've been carrying certain things with me, and maybe I would be in this conversation, but whatever message that he and I share, maybe it wasn't heard the same way when it was coming from me, but now all of a sudden somebody's hearing it from him, and yes, it's genius. And I think that happens a lot.
You took the words out of my mouth from what I was going to say. You took the words literally out of my mouth.
Who's
But
the
do you
author of the
realize
wisdom?
that you do that a lot?
Everybody does that.
No, not to the same degree. No, everybody does not do that. I mean, I've been going around saying we need to listen to children because I'm very aware. Not everybody does that to the same degree. And I keep saying we need to look for the wisdom that every individual is carrying, because everybody's carrying a piece of this puzzle. Everybody.
Well, what I would like to see, this is the utopian dream of the fair conversation, I guess, is that if it's important to spend our time on it, I always provide it with that because I don't want to waste our time on, trivial things, because it's an investment, right? Like going to university is an investment, or going to court is an investment. To find the truth is an investment. And the order of events could or might not be important. Who showed who Schmachtenberger first? I don't know. Whether you got your ideas from that mentor or from your parents, or if you feel like you've downloaded it from the universe. Like, where did you get those ideas that you feel that you came up with them and didn't hear them from them? I'm under the impression that most everything I hear comes from somebody else.
But
Right.
it's not about credit. I'm not talking about credit.
No, it's not about credit. I'm saying order of importance. So, and I really do agree that, sometimes people, I'm the poster child of trying to say something and being understood and taken seriously, where Sam can say the exact same thing. Glenn and Alex won't say anything. I say it, and all of a sudden I've committed some conflict law when I just saw some feedback there. So yeah, I know I could have a better style, but what I imagine is a situation where you could join together around a table and you don't get cut off. Even if you don't get to speak right away, you're never going to be cut off. Your idea will always be put forward, and it will be eventually filtered and judged for importance. It just is and will be. And if the judgment is, I don't know what to say about that, then that's the result. Because, if the judgment is, well, I've heard something else, and I think that, the earth is not flat, I am going to say I haven't actually experimented, but these are 5 experiments that I could come up with that I think your claim is false. You can move forward with that. There doesn't have to be emotion. You don't have to overtalk each other. But, is it important?
Josh?
So a way that you can move forward.
Yeah, it just makes me think of all the parables of most of the ancient stories and religions of dignity and respect to people who don't show that when they approach you, meaning a homeless person, a beggar, a non-scholarly person, a person that hasn't gained the cultural status is speaking, and they should be treated the same way you would with Jesus or with the most revered being in the universe. And that type of ideologue or that type of thinking permeates through different cultures in different ways. And I think in our culture of the West, a lot of it has to do with coming from a feudalistic society of kings and queens and upperclassmen. And I've been spending time in Clubhouse with people that study ancient cultures. And there's a society called the Minoans that come from the area of Crete. In that area, it was a very much a matriarchal society. And the women that ran that were the upper class. So women were just known in their status. They are automatically, as women, upper class citizens, whereas the farmers were not women, and they didn't hold that upper class status in that culture. And I think how we treat people with dignity and respect is also why I came to the GCC, because we have this inclusion principle. At least we'd like to invite other people into the conversation, give them that respect to start with, and then we all made our own cognitive biases and judgments on them as they join week after week the conversations. And I think it's I one of the people that I admire and also can't stand is Barack Obama, of the way that he created his respect in Harvard University by being the president of the legal review. And by taking that position of president, and getting the, you know, the respect and getting the, what's the word I'm looking for? The, I don't know what the word I'm looking for. It's
Status.
not
Bant-
it's
Bantle.
Alignment?
status.
Bantle.
It's
Alignment?
it's influence. It's like what it's like
Influence.
it's like an influence at another level, and then taking that to the next level of his political career, and his wife going, oh, well, you can actually take that to the next level as a senator. And then once he got to
Exploitation?
senator,
Exploitation?
it's rising up the
Manipulation?
ladder of no, not manipulate. It's rising up, it's influence. It's rising up that ladder of influence to what level? Meaning like Muhammad Ali never did it that way. He did it by fighting. But politics
Fame?
is a form of fighting. It's taking a success and then moving it. Gets to be senator. He gives a
Merit.
speech at the Democratic convention that was so influential. And to me, it was so obvious that he stole two different personalities, which is Martin Luther King and like JFK, and sort of mixed them together in this tall, beautifully orated black man with a beautiful body. I mean, the way he moved his body was very controlled. Like if I'm talking to people doing this, I lose people. But if I just sort of do this with my body language, like body language is like Bill Clinton was the master of body language.
Yeah, yeah.
So I'm saying those little nuances of what type of socks you wear, what type of shoes you have on, change
Stuff
the
I just don't
conversation.
care about.
I look at me. I'm wearing the shirt
I
that
know. I
Giselle's
know.
dad gave
That's
me.
why your statement about seeing beyond the individual is so important, and
Yeah, but
it
if
is a
I
manipulation.
shave,
The shirt and tie and
it works.
what's the etymology of the necktie, Barry? Like, was it to haul people around the office?
No, it goes back to England where you had a crest for your house, for your lineage, and the symbols on the necktie were actually a representation of your lineage, the house.
So it was your lineage trophy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And lineage too. Who's your dad? Who's your mom? Who's your ancestors?
Yeah,
That's what I notice. Even in society today, we revere the ancient, well, not ancient, but the what's that show? Downton Abbey, this British aristocratic.
Right.
Like we're still doing that with celebrities today. Like someone becomes like Tom Cruise. Who the fuck is Tom Cruise? A weirdo,
well,
crazy person.
Hold on. Aren't we though experiencing about 5 years of reverse multimedia, where these new tools are coming out where people are doing their own broadcasting, and I think the fourth wall is being broken. And that was what Barack Obama was using. He was an actor, and so when you're doing the fourth wall, the idea is that the audience can see what you're doing, but as an actor, you don't really. So I guess it would be reversed in that way, but it's a staged performance thing where you're keeping a role and you don't break character, right? So if Barack Obama was being himself, then you wouldn't have had the same criticism as him actually acting as two different people fused together with the speech to basically influence people so that he could have great growth and merit up the chain of whatever he's doing. Is that what you're getting at?
This is what I admired him because there are very few systems thinkers in politics. And I have admired the very few who were systems thinkers, because I think we need scientists and system thinkers in politics. Are very rare. And they usually don't last very long either.
You could tell in his eyes he wasn't quickly fooled. Yeah.
He's a brilliant orator and a brilliant thinker. There's no doubt about that. Like I fell in love with him. I worked with my friends to help him get elected, and I believed in hope and change. And then when it came time to vote for him, I did not vote for him. And the reason I didn't is because there was something in my gut that told me he's just too slick. He's just too good. It's almost to the point where I don't think he's going to enact the things he's saying, not because he didn't want to or he didn't believe them, but because he was too much into the power and the respect and the style. It was too much about a persona as much as like the presidents that I admire. They like the buck stops here. Harry Truman, like there's certain integrity aspects that I felt he was showing, but not embodying. Like he showed me everything, but told me nothing. Like, where's the hope and where's the change?
He had the Nobel Peace Prize before he was elected. And then
That was the one that, what the?
at president, he took us into which is the country they take us into war? One of them.
Syria.
Syria. He took us into war in Syria right after getting the Nobel Peace Prize, which I thought was quite remarkable.
Yeah. Your point about him being a system thinker, you know, he did seem to have that. Like, how much does somebody in that position actually have to hold back? Like at the truth conversation table, you sit down with them, you know that they've got things that they cannot tell you. They're not even allowed to discuss with you.
Well, he said that recently. He looked right in the camera and they said, "Are aliens real?" He goes, "I can't tell you."
He was being honest. I can't tell you.
Well, I'm
Yeah.
an alien. I'm real, and I'm an alien.
Yeah. So, you
Where's
know,
your evidence?
I would hope that any points of interest between me and somebody else in this group where I've asked questions to understand better what it is they're talking about, and if it brushes up against the woo topic, especially, to how we could have bookmarked that so that it could have been understood without having to be a controversial thing, without being adversarial. Is that possible, to take a different point of view and still feel like you're being respected by the person and appreciated by the person?
It's very hard to introduce abstractions and give them names, because the names of abstractions are usually metaphors. And then people don't know what these metaphors mean because they don't get the abstraction. Yeah. The
Stories again.
This is a problem I've had all my life. Is as I go up the level from concrete to abstract, I invariably go one notch too abstract, and then I lose my audience. And no amount of analogy or metaphor or anything resolves it. I'm now talking over everybody's head in terms of a pattern they can't see yet.
And on top of that, how good does it feel when you're in the presence of somebody who does get it? You know what I mean?
Well, yeah, you gain respect because they can operate at a peer level and talk about an abstraction as a pattern. It's a pattern in time, it's a pattern in space. And these are the things that allow you to make predictions about the future that do come true. These are what the prophets and the seers and the oracles, the classical, predictors. And there have been very few. I mean, if you go back in history, you find in every generation, there's one or two people who can see over the horizon. And by the way, when talking about see over the horizon, you're talking about sunset and the earth is round. If you lay on the ground flat on the beach, looking at the sunset over the ocean, and you watch, and the sun goes down now, it vanishes, you stand up and you can see the sunset again. And another way to is you're standing up and you see the sunset, and then you go up a flight of stairs real fast, you can see the sunset again. And you can work out the math.
That blew my mind. The first time I did that, I was up on a mountaintop. We were watching the sun go down. And then me and my friend, we ran up the mountain to another vantage point. And then we got another sunset. Then we did it one more time. And it was like, I had 3 sunsets in one day. It was amazing.
You have somebody at ground level and they say, now, and then a person who's one flight up waits and says, now, the time difference can tell you the curvature of the earth. You can do the math.
And that's because you know the mathematics of the azimuth and you understand how to use a sextant and how, like, you believe, you start with the understanding that it is a round surface.
Yeah, if you assume it's a globe, if you assume it's a globe, you can make a prediction that the person on the ground is going to see the sunset, and then so many seconds later, the guy who's 100 meters up, or however much you want it to be, 10 meters up, you make that prediction based on the theory that it's round, and your theory is correct. Your prediction is correct. It's a classical experiment that anybody can do with a little bit of math, not much. The Joel Paris level of geometry, it's not that complicated. It's a fun experiment. High school students.
Don't grin, Stacy.
I just what? I just kept thinking
the whole
time we were. Well, no, the whole time we were talking, like, there's all these abstract things we're talking about. And I got my education in science from the place where Barry taught at the Boston Museum of Science. And the reason I liked going there is because you'd walk in and there'd be all these experiments all over the place. So all you would do is constantly recreate all the experiments.
Yeah.
And people told me that gravity was a certain way in a vacuum, and there was a giant tube, and every like 15 minutes they would drop feathers,
Right.
and then they would drop a feather in a vacuum, and you would see that what Newton was talking about, that things fall at the same rate.
Right.
I mean, without experiencing all of the amazing new science that we've come up with, there's been probably 100,000 breakthroughs in the last 10 years in the science community. How do you to recreate all of those? It would take a lifetime. I mean, there's so much science. It's amazing.
I spent 25 years there every Saturday for 25 years, introducing very elementary science to the visitors of all ages, children to grandparents.
One mark of getting older is realizing that your high school science no longer applies. For the most part, so much has changed, right? A lot
But
has
so much
changed.
is still the same. A lot is.
Well, fundamentals are, but it's quite a thing.
I had to
And
learn,
those go ahead.
quantum mechanics after high school. They didn't have quantum mechanics in the
Yeah.
high school physics when I was in 12th grade. Wasn't available. It was available in the literature, but it wasn't available in the textbooks for high school.
Same thing here. I might have heard the word quark a couple of times.
Yeah, I don't get to play with uranium. No one gives me some uranium to play with.
Actually, I played with uranium in university.
How was that?
It was kind of decaying.
It was decadent.
It was very decadent decaying. Yeah.
That's
Standoffish, a little
funny.
standoffish. But I find also too that you get in with people who are positive, working together. They've got a context that they're comfortable with and they're aligned. And that's all great and fine. But if you get together in a more open space with diverse people, then you find that you have to have the fair conversation tools to make sure that you can put up some guardrails and stick to the points. And it gets a lot more tricky.
Yeah, because in the Occupy movement, we had to deal with literally crazy people, meaning they were whacked out on drugs, and politicians and college students and older people and younger people. Every aspect came through that movement. So what was adopted right off the bat, which made the movement actually happen, was Robert's Rules of Order. And I talked about adopting that here at the GCC, but we've never adopted Robert's Rules of Order.
What are Robert's Rules of Order?
For meetings.
It's a way of keeping time and making sure that everyone has an equal amount of time to speak, and giving everyone a chance in a circle to go around, and then note keeping on what was talked about and giving people the ability to have an equal footing in a common dialogue setting of a group of people.
So
And
I could see
there's
how that would,
yeah.
I could see how that would work in the beginning. After that, I mean, I'm not sure that I think everybody should have an equal amount of time to speak.
Well, hold on.
Good point.
It goes from 8 people maybe to 4 people, and then they do Robert's rules again between the 4 of them. You see, it can split off, but the idea is just to be fair and be conscious, I think.
We had-
And
Well,
keep
also just to
notes.
have order and just say,
Yeah.
okay, wait a second, you have more to say, but your time's up. I exceed the floor to the next person, and then
Yeah.
go back around. And
But
that's
fair.
what I don't see happening here. Well, fair, but also orderly. Like
Yeah,
there were
I think you
times
need
when
order for
Sam-
fairness.
Sam has done that with what's the gentleman's name? I think it's Eric. We haven't seen him in a long time.
Eric
The-
Rangel.
Yeah. He put a timer, set a little JavaScript, and we kept time for a whole Saturday, and it
Yeah.
felt good. At least for me, that was the best Saturday barn raising, where everyone stopped. Does that make sense? Is Colin's hand raised? Does he need to speak? Go ahead, Colin.
Does anybody remember the talk tool that I brought to the group that Yoakum Strahl had designed, and I was working at trying to build out a little bit? It had timers, all kinds of stuff. It's just we got to have something simple. Like the group doesn't want to make it too complicated. So that's why I think the real work happens when 3 people say, let's talk, like you were saying, most of your first year, the GCC. And Sam says it too, that I'm talking like Trump. Can you follow what I'm saying? No. We come together at the town square and we talk generally, give updates, what's interesting. But then I think the real work happens afterwards. Like I had an offer to Stacy last week that we could look at some of these retrospective ideas. And it's the exact same offer I have to Glenn with Schmachtenberger, right? And how do we bring that back? And I have an offer out to the group, like how do we try to map this stuff? I think it's the same offer Sam has to the group with his workflowy, right? We got all these tools. Go ahead, Barry.
You know, I appreciate the concept of equal time, and it tends to be important if you're having a debate, because the amount of time that you get to talk determines opportunity to convince everybody. But I have a different personal objective. I want to be the person who says the most in the fewest words in the least time. So that at the end of the session of an hour or 2 or 3, somebody says, Barry said one sentence that took less than a minute. And that was the thing that made me think. That's what I want to go and do some homework about. And so, although equal time is important in some contexts, I don't adopt it. I want to say
no guarantee.
The most profound thing, the most insightful thing in the fewest words in the least amount of time.
Yeah.
I agree.
That's the equal opportunity versus the equal outcome thing. Equal outcomes, kind of the equal outcome, everybody gets the same time. It's no guarantee of quality, right? But it's kind of a fairness. I get that. And I think it's a mark of how prepared you are, how you can speak less and say more, which is one of the mantras I try to bring forward. And, the maps should speak that for me after I've, written it, corrected it, looked at it, iterated a bit. Well, there it is. It's a book, it's a map, it's whatever. Here's where you get to where I am in my thinking if you care to catch up. And it is catching up, right? And I also have to catch up with what they know on the other hand. So, it's a two-way street of being able to remember and document the context of what the subject is. And that's the frustrating part. We just glean the surface. And I really like the idea of going back and doing retrospectives and us focusing on what's important to us. And, just to make a small point, I tried to suss that out with working with William Charlton, talking with him a little bit more. He's still on it with his skeins.
How's he doing?
And,
I sent a message to him and we were going to talk. That was a couple months ago, but
yeah,
is he doing okay? How's he doing?
Yeah, he's doing okay, and he's still working on his project of points of interest.
Do you know this guy, Barry? Are you guys, Stacey?
I don't recognize the name. You said Charlton?
Yeah,
don't
William
recognize the
Charlton.
He's a member of the group.
I've never seen him. At least I don't think I've ever seen him.
I can send you a video of him talking to Tammy.
Well, I haven't seen Tammy. Actually, it's not true. I've seen an old video with Tammy in it from 2 years ago or something, but I've never been in a session with Tammy live.
Oh, she's a wonderful person.
I'm sure she is.
Let's call her and bring her back into the conversation because I miss Tammy. I like
she's
William
obviously
Charlton,
got better things to do.
Yeah, I was just going to say, just to speak on his work, is he was mathematically taking the Earth and sectioning it off into hexagrams, so different geographical areas, and then coming up with governance systems for how the hexagrams overlay without borders on a map.
That's a totally different thing. Yeah, that's a totally different thing than what we're talking about. He's got several things, and he's also extremely interesting, Barry. You'd appreciate that he goes back into the history and etymology, humankind in the sapiens way, and he's very methodical, analytic.
Conversing with him, but
he's a great guy.
On the session at the same time, as far as I can recall.
Go ahead, Stacey. I'll talk about my experiment in the group with him later. You've got something.
I was just going to say that what Josh just said about him was very interesting to me, because when I think on the call we were on, I think Glenn said something about, but would it scale? And I always think that, why are we looking to scale so big when the key is to have it work in like a hexagram and then be next to each other and be able to align, or to, I mean, I'm being very abstract, but what you just said about his work makes more sense to me than this trying to find one big solution for everything.
I don't think it is one big solution. I think scaling is in its success from, small little foundational parts that just like cells in a body or in a tree or whatever. It's just, there's small foundational parts. That seems to be the way nature does systems. And
I was going to say, why are we not using more of nature systems for our systems thinking? That's another thing.
well, computers are that way. Computers are that way. And
Best
No,
systems
they're
thinkers
not.
do that.
they are in a
What's
way.
that?
They are in a way.
The best systems thinkers do go back to nature, because if nature solved a problem, the guy who developed the Gossamer Condor, the lighter, the self-propelled aircraft that finally got the Kramer Prize, he went out and studied birds for hours. And, every time he was out in the country, he would study birds, and he came up with insights for human powered aircraft that no aeronautical engineer who doing heavier than air would ever attend to. He was way outside the regime of classical aeronautical engineering. And he got a lot of it from watching birds.
Well, I'm going full circle with that idea. We're allowing more data and input to go into the computer, allowing for more tweaking of that data, which is the way I see nature doing it over time through natural selection or whatever you want to call nature's
Natural selection.
trajectory. In tweaking that with more data, nature has a plethora of data. There's no, it goes all the way to the microbes, to each water droplet, to every single gust of wind from every hot little rock that blows and cools. There's just so much data. Yeah, there's a massive amount. So let me get to my point, which is in the AI field, in the machine learning field, I should say, not AI, but in machine learning, they'll take a mass amount of data, stick it into a computer, and then let the computer model it, not a human with the biases, but the computer. And they did an experiment on a car of getting 128 points of measurement on the car, riding it around the track, and then giving that data to the computer. And what it created for the chassis of the car was very similar to the rib cage of a bird.
Yes, absolutely.
Crazy, eh?
And the same thing in the African culture is they were doing these complex mathematical fractal weaving of different fences and different cloths. And what they found is that because it's an older culture in certain African countries, they learned through trial and error over 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 years to create these really complex mathematical weaving patterns that look like they came from a computer.
Yep.
So I'd like to propose we absorb that information and then slip back to the William Charlton discussion and keep the nature part, where when we're trying to figure out what's a point of interest or what somebody, what's the deal, what's the proposal, what's the point of interest, what's the claim. If there's nothing, there's nothing, right? It's like, hand me a beer. But if there's something to say, he's made an idea of how you would take in this information to start to, and I think this is a common idea from a lot of people, how you would relate it to cause and effect. Okay. And he's got some ideas and diagrams, and they look like knowledge trails to me, but he calls them skeins. And he's got skeins. It's like a
SKEIN.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, skein. Yeah. I know it got me. I think it's an English term. I don't know.
Skein, but okay.
Skein, yes, right. And a skein, that's correct in English. So so I said, okay, well, tell you what, in the GCC, I see a human element to the beginning of trying to collect that data, like the strange attractor, what's going to bring humans, the interesting part. And I think a lot of that is, conversation, asking people, what is it that you want, need, whatever. How do you bring that? You just don't give everybody a form and say, fill it out, right? So I was thinking about, okay, how's that UI going to look like? In the GCC, the first question I could think of is to ask people if, picturing I had the system and I was ready to take in their data, my first question was, so what is it you're here for at the GCC? Like, what do you see the GCC as being? And what I got from some people, and I think Tyra would be one of these people. I don't know if Barry ever met Anna.
Yeah, I think back in maybe August a year ago, she was in one or two sessions before she vanished.
Yeah. Well, when I was questioning her, and she was very kind to give me the time, and we came down to the conclusion that she's just really at the GCC for connection. Now, what she means by that word and how rich it is could be system thinking, right? But in actuality, she wasn't here to do anything. So she was more on the Doug side of things. Go ahead.
How did she get here? I was just wondering the genesis of Anna and how did she get to the GCC? Do you know
That's
that?
also really interesting. That's interesting too. I
I'm
don't know
asking
it
if you
fully.
know that.
Yes, I
So
do,
her
kind of.
son,
Yeah.
her son Daniel Harris was
Right.
working
Right.
in the
Yeah.
beginning for the idea of getting the prize of the $1 million for the systems thinking.
Oh, that goes back 4 years now.
Right.
Yeah.
So she was the original, and she was the mom of one of the people. And I guess she found community, and what she wanted was connection. That's what she wanted.
That's what I found. Yeah, I was
Right.
looking for community. I found this Russian lady, Alona, who said there is a community that meets on Zoom. And I had just started using Zoom for my business. And I thought to myself, I'm going to need this tool called Zoom because it's going to be a big deal later on. I just knew I had used all, there's a Dr. Klaus in Santa Barbara is the guy that created the whole WebEx and all of that online video, chatting and blah, blah, blah. And I was using his tools, but I knew there would be some sort of thing that allowed us all to have these type of conversations we're having right now. And I knew that if I wanted to get good at it, I had to be on it on a regular basis. And so that's why I started coming to the GCC, was to learn Zoom.
So that's kind of where I got confused, because we all kind of landed here in different ways. And Sam and Tammy had an agreement to keep going after even if they didn't receive the award for the challenge, the grant, I guess. And so anyway, we're left with this chaotic space of trying to lean in.
But is
And
it
Doug took
chaotic,
it one way.
Colin?
I feel
Is that a
Doug
good
took it
word?
one way. Well, I think Doug took it one way and Sam took it another way. And there's always been a conflict between being and doing.
If you do the etymology of the GCC, if you do the history and go back to the GCC, it was the dedication of Tammy and Sam to keep it going after the prize.
Yes.
And then what arose out of that organically was conflict of human nature, of people being in conflict. And it was having trouble continuing with that conflict. So Doug stepped in and said, I will create a day on Sunday to unblock those conflicts. And he called it unblocking.
Was it personal unblocking? Because they turned, I think, into the deep dives about the time I came.
No,
Deep dives were
the
happening.
deep dives were on Saturday.
Yeah. Okay. Well, so the time that the
So
deep dives
this-
are going on, the unblocking already existed. Right.
So yeah, so the fact that Doug took that on himself to help the group with the skills that he felt he could offer to the community of GCC on a Sunday, to
Right.
allow for those conflicts not to carry over into the Thursday and the Friday conversations, which Thursday was always the chaotic one, the open, anything goes Thursday conversations, which was my favorite. I loved it. And then out of that arose, we can do things on Friday as experiment. Ended up happening was the experiment ended up, who wants to take over this experiment and do different experiments? And no one really felt very I didn't want to experiment. I tried to do a Friday science I think I did it 2 or 3 times. Let's do Friday science. And then I realized that doesn't work because there needs to be a prerequisite before we have science class. And I ended up talking with them for about 3 weeks about the speed of light. Is it a constant? Does it exist?
I can't believe I missed those.
It equals the speed of gravity. It's now called the speed of causation.
Is that what they're calling it now?
Yeah, I wanted to know,
Interesting.
is the speed of gravity the same as the speed of light? And the answer is yes, they are the same. They're
Did
now
Stacy
going-
wave goodbye, I think?
I guess Stacy
I
dropped
saw
off.
something.
Stacy dropped
I
off.
didn't see. Let me
Okay.
see.
See you, Stacy.
She's gone. But anyhow, and
State
it
of
turns out that it's a very interesting story, but it's technical. You know, you could spend 20 minutes explaining why those two are identical and necessarily so. But it's a very
Is that
arcane
the bet? Can I ask you without going too deep? Is that the bending of space time itself because of gravity, or
well, masses like the sun and planets will cause space to curve. And then light will take a geodesic, which it'll follow the curve. But the phenomenon that, first of all, the measurement that gravity and light travel at the same rate, that took a long time, first of all, to get the measurements to confirm it, and then get the theory that explained why it's necessarily so. It's not a trivial piece of science to understand, but it's now called the speed of causation.
when did that come about? Because I'm just hearing about that now from you, so I didn't know that.
Well, it's sometime in the 20th century. Like, for example, Newton did not know that the speed of light was finite. Well, he sort of assumed it might be. But let's say that when you see the sun in that direction, in reality, the sun is not there anymore. It's already, well, because the earth has been turning. So it takes 8.5 minutes for the light to get from the sun to the earth. While it's in flight for that 8.5 minutes, things are changing. So the sun isn't where you see it. The question is, then where's the force of gravity? Is the force of gravity to the sun where we see it, or to the sun where it really is? And it turns out, if it were the case that the gravity attraction of the sun does not line up with where we see the light now, then we couldn't have a circular orbit or any orbits at all. It has to be that the force of gravity is aligned with the direction of light that we see. So the force of gravity is exactly where we see the sun now, meaning that gravity got to us at the same time as the light. And mathematically, you can show that if you don't do that, you don't get orbital dynamics that we actually experience. That was one of the first ones.
Yeah, you're blowing my mind. I'm just thinking that I always thought gravity was a constant, and I've also been told that we still are trying to understand exactly how that constant works.
Oh, yeah.
And then light is something that I've been skeptical on, that it's a constant because of the fact that we can't break out of what we can't break out of, to know and to see it from an objective vantage point far away outside of our universe. You know,
I can tell you where to go. If you know who Ethan Siegel is, he's on Facebook, but he writes on Forbes magazine, and he writes, his column is called "It Starts with a Bang," and he writes on cosmology, and he's written one of the best articles on this story of the speed of light versus the speed of gravity. So Ethan Siegel, find him on Facebook, find him on Forbes magazine, and find that particular story. If you can't find it, I'll find it for you. He's the best explainer that I know of.
Thank you
Yeah,
for
he's
that. I appreciate it.
Crazy looking fella too. He's
Yeah,
right out
he's
there.
a weird looking guy, but
Yeah, he's right
but
out
he's
there.
a beautiful writer. He's a fabulous writer.
The smarter you are, the crazier you are, they seems to be.
Yeah, I feel like we are moving towards the singularity where the amount of data could never have been computed, and we're starting to compute larger and larger amounts of data.
Right.
And I'm not saying that we're going to create an artificial intelligence, but hopefully an augmented, where we can now have better data. I mean, better feedback loops, better information, and maybe solve some of these riddles that we've never been able to because of compute power with, ones and zeros.
Yeah, you're right about that. That's a whole week. You could spend 3 hours on that topic too. But this beyond AI is AW, artificial wisdom. And you can go from intelligence to wisdom. It's part of a next level of abstraction.
That's the book, The Ending of Time, with Krishnamurti and David Bohm, which is the transcript of their conversation.
Yeah. Okay.
And they constantly get from science to spirituality.
Right.
And then where they meet in the middle is that wisdom side.
Right.
And I think David Bohm concedes the floor to the wisdom of Krishnamurti's life's work.
Right.
But he also concedes the floor to David Bohm, to the wisdom and the experience of his scientific endeavors. So
The deeper you go into science at the deepest level, the more you realize that spirituality is part of the whole story. It's ineluctably part of the whole story. Humans got to spirituality independent of science initially. They were like two different domains. When you get deep enough into science, you see they really lock together very, very neatly, very tightly. But very few scientists get that deep.
Have you filled out a term for spirituality in our term sheet?
Yes, it's in there. Pretty sure it's in there.
Look what Barry's term is.
In fact, I had proposed to explain that to you way back in the last week of January.
Oh,
I was way ahead. I was way ahead of where you were ready to hear that.
Could be. Let's see here. Where did I put that?
Eric, while he's looking for that, would it be I'm thinking, it just keeps going in my mind, is spirituality is the understanding of dark matter, which is the place where we can't understand because we don't have the measurement tools yet.
You can't see the stuff. You can detect it gravitationally, but it's not visible. And so something like 97 or 95% of the stuff of the universe is invisible. It's dark energy and dark matter.
But isn't that a conjecture of a prerequisite of, like, that's where I get stuck, is if you use Newtonian physics and if you use what Newton understood about light coming through the prism and heat, and just all of our thinking has been built off of a laddering effect of knowledge. Right. And thus it comes to a hypothesis that there must be forces that we can't see or measure, but we know that they have to exist. Yeah, right. Phenomena.
So for example, we understand the very nice model of light goes all the way back to Maxwell. You simply have electric and magnetic fields oscillating at right angles and traveling at the speed of light, and that solves Maxwell's equations. The question is, then shouldn't there be a comparable set of equations for gravity? Because you're going to get the same speed. And the thing is that we don't have a model of gravity like we have for electromagnetic radiation. And the thing is that electromagnetic radiation, remember, you have to have electrons or protons, you have to have charged particles in motion. Particles in motion, you get radio waves. What do you have in motion to have gravitational waves? All you know is that if a star burns mass, which it does, it gets lighter, then the amount of gravity that it produces is declining. But you don't learn about it until this 8.5 minutes later, okay? So the gravity of the sun is declining at the same rate that it's burning mass. But the question is, how is that propagating? This Einstein sort of started us on the road to understanding that the fabric of space-time isn't a rectangular grid. Newton had it as a rectangular, and then he could have much simpler mathematics. Einstein had incredibly horrific mathematics as soon as you have the fabric of space-time being curved. But in fact, you have to do that, otherwise GPS doesn't work. You have to use the math, or else your GPS thinks you're over there when you're really over here.
Yeah, I just want to keep discovering, meaning I'm so excited about the James Webb Telescope for the last 20 years. I just can't wait for that to get up there and see if we detect new things. And they just did I follow a program called Astrum on YouTube, and they just did a piece on the probe that went around Mercury and the electromagnetic effects that they're finding that they didn't know. And, just by mapping the whole entire planet, I feel like we can do all the science we want from Earth, but until we're a multi-planetary, multi-galaxy species, like, we need to go to other galaxies and find out if any of these things that we hold to be beliefs hold any weight in another galaxy.
Yeah, but the construction of the gravitational, what's it called, the thing that measures gravitational waves, that's only been around, I think, for less than a decade. It took them 30 years to conceive of it and figure out how to build it, and then get the money and really build it. And now we can detect gravitational waves, which have been predicted all the way since Einstein for a century. He predicted gravitational waves. and they behave the way the mathematics that Einstein worked out suggests. And now we can see, quote, see with, the gravitational waves, the merging of black holes. We can see black holes colliding and merging, and that generates huge gravitational waves, which are strong enough to be detected all the way, through deep space. That's the beginning of this next stage of, it's not just light, not just radio waves, it's gravitational waves. And that's one of the reasons that we're beginning to understand that not everything, that the universe is more than everything we can see, because not everything puts out radio waves or light waves. It's that gravitational waves. And that the fact that it puts out gravitational waves, or the fact that the universe is expanding at an accelerating rate, like, how can that be? Newton's model doesn't allow that. What? You could say that an explosion is expanding out, but why is it an accelerating rate? That doesn't make sense. It should be, the gravity should be pulling it back in as it. So yeah, there's lots of things which are relatively new measurements that completely upend our very simple understandings of 30, 40, 50 years ago.
Yeah, that goes back to the original conversation with Bret Weinstein as one type of scientist, which is a biologist.
Yeah.
And Schmachtenberger is one kind of scientist, which is a system scientist, or I don't know what his credential is or what he touts himself as, his framework of his view of knowledge and wisdom. And then there's a documentary on Netflix about 9 different scientists visiting each other interdisciplinary and explaining what each other does.
Yeah.
And that, to me, is what I think is missing, is the overlapping and interdisciplinary studies with all the new knowledge we've collected over the last 20 years. To me, that's all that's missing in society, is to just get these scientists talking to each other.
They've known for, forever that green plants have a phenomenon called photosynthesis, which allows you to take energy from the photons of sunlight and turn it into molecules like sugars and things. And they couldn't figure out how the devil it worked. And finally, the first theory of what's happening inside chlorophyll and all that stuff is that there's a quantum mechanical effect involved. And if you don't figure out the quantum mechanical component of this whole model, you can't get a model that works. But you couldn't have a quantum mechanical component of the model until you had quantum mechanics.
That's to me, that's what I think is the forefront of human endeavors, whether it be scientific or whatever, is to create new frameworks of thinking that create the next layer of abstraction into material and reality. Like, it's
so that means we have an opportunity to create artificial photosynthesis. We don't have to have an organic green leaf, green plants. We can synthesize a synthetic process, turning photons into something more efficiently, like the plants do. But we had to understand how the plants do it. And we couldn't do that without quantum mechanics as part of the story.
Yeah, the two places that I'm sort of, my head is stuck in for the last 10 years is the signaling of not just cells, because we've done a lot of study on cells, but the signaling of microbiota and bacteria and how they signal each other.
Yes. Lots
and
of
then and then the signaling of trees, meaning the last 10 years there's been massive breakthroughs in what we thought was isolated. Well, not just the roots, but the fabric in between the roots, which is the mycelium.
Right.
And just now starting to understand the methodology of communication between that web of mycelium, and learning that things that we thought were separate and, just the framework of natural selection and capitalism. These trees are sucking resources from these trees. It turns out that's not true at all in nature. Certain trees have offspring that they are giving life force to, meaning they're giving nutrients to their offspring, but then they're
giving succor to them.
Yep. And they're also doing that towards other trees, because there's this more deeper dive into the knowledge of the forest that is not what we thought of human framework of, because we always like to anamorphize nature into how we would act as opposed to what's actually going on.
Go
So
back-
meaning they'll
Go back
I
to the
digress.
Disney movie Pocahontas, where she sings Colors of the Wind. Colors of the Wind is exactly about that. It's the spirit. It's all very metaphorical and spiritual. But in fact, Pocahontas is telling the story that's beyond the level of science, at least when it was written. Now you can sort of listen to Colors of the Wind and say, oh yeah, this is a beautiful poetic metaphor for very advanced science.
Mhm.
That
And-
brings me back. Oh, go ahead, Josh.
Oh, I was just going to say, if you travel to older cultures, meaning to the Middle East, to where Babylonia actually took place, there was a society there, or if you go to older cultures in Peru, Egypt, blah, 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 China, all these older places, some of their stories seem to just be metaphorical, or India,
Right.
but they have a real basis and understanding in science that was so advanced that we had to relearn it again in the 8th century, in the 12th century, in the 16th century, and then now again in 2022. We're going to have to learn it again.
Right.
Mm.
So, I don't know if Sam is still attending. We're 20 minutes before the 4-hour mark, which is when you lose the transcript stuff. So
Not necessarily.
we don't want to make sure that we don't go over time